Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku became a crime boy instead of a cowboy? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. To say Izuku was a gentle soul would be an understatement. He placed others before himself always, even if it wasn't deserved. But despite his kind nature, people treated him horribly. All except his mother, that is. Inko Midoriya was the one light in his life. She loved him and peppered him with affection daily. Unfortunately, even this created trouble for the boy. Now was he constantly called a mommy's boy. After all, what high schooler has only their mom as a friend? Izuku eyed his reflection in the school bathroom. He touched a now bleeding ear, wondering how he would hide it from his mother. See, unlike Kaken or someone normal, Izuku had a mutation quirk. He flicked his ear and hissed as his touch made the new wound sting. A cow. His quirk made him look like a human mashed with a cow. Sure, his face was human, but he had two little horns curling from his hair and two floppy ears. But it wasn't just his head that was affected. He had a tail, one white with a wisp of green at the end. He even had hooves. But instead of strong, bulky legs, he was thin and dainty. More like a calf than a full-grown bull. Even his hooves were pale and pink, like the nails on a white dog. His fingernails had the same color. Mom said it reminded her of strawberry milk. Izuku looked back at his face. His lip was still in its normal state of a constant wobble. It made him look like he was about to cry. His eyes were framed with two big eyelashes. Kaken said it made him look like a girl, and the pink of his cheeks certainly didn't help. Izuku dapped up the blood from his ear. A boy with a wolf quirk thought it was funny to nip it. Sure, everyone in the classroom did laugh, but Izuku didn't see the humor in hurting someone. Wolves don't even eat cows. At least not alone. Izuku mumbled to himself, tossing the now dirty towel into the trash. He sighed and eyed his ear again before slipping out the heavy bathroom door. Afternoon light filtered in through the school's windows, leaving long shadows trailing the few students left in the building. Classes had let out, but after-school programs were still running. So a quiet chatter kept the school awake as Izuku dragged his feet to his own after-school program. The special-made shoes on his feet clattered on the ground, making a passing girl giggle. Izuku glared at the shoes, offended. Their red fabric just stared back, inanimate. The family doctor said he needed to stop wearing shoes soon, if not his hooves might never grow properly. Izuku grit his teeth at the idea. People already mocked him for his tail, ears, and even his sad excuse of horns. What mean words would they come up with for his hooves? Izuku wished he was back in middle school. At least Kaken kept people away back then. But now, every bully had a chance. Izuku opened an exit door to the school. Slipping out, he was in the backyard of the school. Not too far away were younger kids playing on the school's playground. Izuku ignored them as they blew raspberries at him. Soon he found his group. A single teacher and no one else. The old man smiled weakly at him as he approached. "How was your day, Midoriya?" He papped a place next to him in the dirt. "Alright, I guess." Izuku sat down next to the old man. Better that bad." Seemed like his elder didn't much care. Not that Izuku was surprised. Tools were placed in his hands and he wordlessly got to work. His job was simple: dig where the teacher pointed. It was supposed to be a gardening class. But instead, Izuku was never taught anything, let alone anything on gardening. Instead, he just dug as the old man waved around some kind of device. Whenever it would beep, he had to dig whatever the thing alerted to. The things were always metal, and if he was lucky he was allowed to keep a dirty coin or two. Izuku had looked up what the strange beeping thing was. A metal detector, a handheld one though. Why his teacher had him help dig up metal instead of planting plants? Izuku hadn't the slightest idea. Izuku watched as the old man waved the tool about. It chirped now and then, but apparently, those weren't important enough to dig up. What do the different beeps mean? Izuku asked, leaning against his shovel. Different metal, simple as that. He sounded done with the conversation despite it just beginning. Izuku spared a glance back to the school building. The sun had passed the rooftops, soon it would be dark. The air was cool and dry. The playground was empty now, all the children had left for home. How long were they staying out this time? He hoped it wouldn't be much longer. The sudden squeal of the metal detector made Izuku WHP back around. Sure enough, his teacher was just as shocked. It had never made that big of a sound before. Instantly he was summoned over to dig whatever at below the dirt. Izuku quickly scooped a large chunk of dirt from the ground. His teacher pawed through it, only for nothing to show. He tested the dirt, nothing. He tested the fresh hole, another loud squeal. Whatever it was deeper than what he and the teacher usually found. The same process started only to repeat long after the sun left. Shovel after shovel, nothing came up. Instead, the detector just wailed and cried louder the further Izuku dug. Just as Izuku plopped down another pile of dirt, he winced seeing water pool in the dirt. Instantly his teacher cussed and threw the device. A water pipe. And a broken one at that. His teacher's mood made Izuku shrink in on himself. Was it really that big of a deal? This was just the old man's hobby or something, right? Why was he getting so mad? Izuku yelped as a rock was connected with his head. He stumbled back holding his forehead, surprised to see blood when he looked down. Blood leaked from his head like an open faucet. Looking to his teacher, he only saw the man stomping off. What had Izuku done to deserve a rock to the head? Izuku glared down at the hole. Stupid water pipe. Izuku grabbed his shovel and stabbed into the hole in anger. Sure enough, he heard the shovel's blade clash against something metal. But the thing shifted. Instead of an open pipe, what seemed to be a pole poked up at him. Izuku paused, then poked at the dirty metal. It moved easily and fell out of the dirt, trapping it. Looking back to where his teacher had been, he saw that the man was long gone. Deciding the least the man owed him for a bloody head was a weird pole, Izuku leaned over the hole. Reaching the item was a little hard, but soon he had it in his hands. Rubbing the thing with his sleeve, he paused. At its end was what looked to be a handle. Jipping it, Izuku tugged. It clattered and clanked dully, but not much happened. Well, it was better than old quarters. Izuku stood up from the dirty ground. Maybe he could find out what it was. Izuku pushed the door of a pawn shop open. He had texted his mother her would be late and ran to the shopping district just in time to find what he hoped would bring him answers. After all, pawn shops took all kinds of things. Someone there would have a much better chance of knowing what the thing was than him. Surely the item was worth something. Izuku happily trotted over to the counter and placed the thing in front of a man. Ain't it a bit late for a kid like you to be selling old toys? The man seemed polite enough, if not tired. His gray hair and stubble looked well-groomed, but the bags under his eyes and the smirk-wince showed his age. One of his teeth was missing, but the man seemed to embrace the gap, using the hole to hold his cigar. Oh, it's not a toy, I dug it up today. Izuku happily chirped as the man began to eye the item. Well, I suppose I should have guessed with the dirt. The man glared at the item as he rubbed it in his shirt. Some of the caked dirt broke apart and fell off, and a dull surface was exposed. The man turned the thing this way and that but shook his head. I can't buy it like this, but once you clean it up, go ahead and come back, alright kid? The man handed him back the weird pole. Oh, that's okay, what is it though? Izuku hugged the pole to his chest and smiled up at the man. He had to admit he was eyeing all the cool things in the store. He might come back some other time just to look around. You don't know? It's a katana, you know, the one thing Americans know about Japan. Izuku blinked. Oh, as cool as that was, he didn't really have a use for something like a katana. Would Mom even allow him to have something like this in the house? So, what do I do with it? I'm not exactly someone who needs to stab people. The man cringed. Cut, katanas cut, kiddo. Izuku felt dumb, and what do kids do when they feel dumb? Try and be funny. My point still stands. Izuku flinched as the man suddenly broke into a laugh. Izuku smiled, seeing that the man was enjoying Izuku's attempt at humor. The man leaned across the counter and smiled at him. Name's Jiren, yours? The man offered him a scared and rough hand. Izuku. He happily shook Jiren's hand with a wide smile. Say, how about I teach you how to clean that thing up, and in return, you can hang around here and clean things? I'd give you fair pay, of course. Jiren's smirk shifted into a more sincere smile with his words. Izuku lit up at the offer. The job. A real job. Mom would be so proud of him. She always went on and on about him needing friends. A boss was like a friend, right? Plus, maybe he can meet new people at work. Yes. Izuku felt his tail curl up and wag around as he went on the tips of his hooves to grab the man's hand with both of his own. He shook the man's hand like his life depended on it, and Jiren smiled and laughed at his antics. Izuku closed his eyes as a hand met his head, ruffling his hair roughly. What a catch you are, kiddo, but head home for tonight, okay? Visit me after school tomorrow, alright? Jiren pulled away and took out his cigar to tap it off in an ashtray. A light, Mr. Jiren. Izuku called, running to the store's door. Just Jiren, Mr. Jiren makes me feel old. Jiren chuckled. A light, Jiren. Izuku chirped, slipping out onto the nighttime street. His next day went by in a flash. Despite every lesson, his mind was elsewhere. No matter how many times he tried to focus, truly focus, his mind kept showing him the image of the pawnshop. A blurry image of Jiren smiling and waving him in persisted. Izuku stared blankly at his teacher as he scrawled directions on the blackboard. The man was the one in charge of the garden club turned treasure hunt. Izuku wondered if he should even join him tonight. Sure, they might come across another trinket, but would Izuku be allowed to keep it? Izuku glared at the man's bony fingers as they held some chalk. Would Izuku get another rock to the head maybe? He picked the chance to miss a good find. There was no way Izuku was digging anything up for the old man after that little stunt. Izuku quickly copied the directions into his book. Luckily, this class was the last. Soon enough the bell would ring and Izuku and the other students could run off. Izuku lifted his head up, hearing the characteristic sound of tape being pulled. Before he could even turn around, he found his tail being taped to his back. Izuku instantly squawked and scrambled to his feet. Instantly the class erupted in laughter as Izuku reached desperately to try and unstick his tail. Luckily it was cheap Scotch tape. With a flick of his tail he was free. His teacher desperately tried to control the class, waving down children as they clambered over their desks to run out of class. So they just wanted a way to get out of class early. Izuku grabbed his tail in hand and glared at the leftover tape stuck in it. Great, the last thing he needed was tape in his fur. Izuku's soured mood instantly brightened as he approached Jiren's pawn shop. He wasn't even in the door yet and Jiren was already smiling at him through the shop's windows. Izuku quickened his pace and entered the store. Hey there, little bull. Ready to help? Jiren's voice was the first sound he heard entering the store. The next was the sound of a scratchy radio. Instantly his ears were at attention. Jiren laughed and patted a small radio on the counter. Poor thing needs a new speaker dash. Jiren's face lit up. Hey, how about to help me with this today, kiddo? Radio's repairs are a lot easier than sword restorations after all. As he spoke, Jiren pulled out a box of wild wires and other things Izuku couldn't recognize. Think of it as a game. You need to level up your skills to dash. Jiren unexpectedly cringed as Izuku rounded the counter. Man, I sound like the brat. Jiren's words quickly filtered to a stop as Izuku situated himself at the counter to work. Izuku was so excited. Sure, it was just a dinky old radio, but it was his first task. He had to make the thing perfect and make Jiren happy he hired him. Izuku began turning the squawking appliance this way and that, quickly finding the screws holding it together. He looked up at his older companion expecting a slow down, but instead Jiren was leaned on the counter, just watching. You won't learn if I just do it for you, now will you? I'll tell you to stop if you're about to break it. Jiren's glasses hid his eyes, but his body showed how relaxed he was. Well, Izuku guessed the worst he could do was try, right? Peeking under the counter provided a surplus of tools. Hesitantly Izuku grabbed a screwdriver, only for it to not fit the screws in the radio. Said radio hissed at him as if it were offended. Wincing at the sound, Izuku returned to the undercounter for another look. After a moment he finally found a screwdriver that fit. Next, he was able to pop off the radio's face, only to see a mess of wires and floppy speaker heads. Was cleaning an old knife actually harder than this? Distantly Izuku recognized the sound of the shop's door. Jiren left him to his task to help what must be a customer. He didn't look up, too focused on his challenge. After replacing a rusty plate with an identical, but clean, one, the device in his hands croaked before a muffled sound began to play. Quickly Izuku put the face back on the radio, the hard plastic holding the speakers just right, making the sound grow clearer. Now in his hands, Izuku held a working radio. Izuku smiled enough to hurt his face, whipping his head around the shop to see Jiren. Only his new boss wasn't to be seen. Izuku looked around more. It's not like the man evaporated. From behind a door, Izuku could see a familiar pair of shoes. Izuku hopped away from the counter and trotted over to the door. He paused, seeing there was no handle, a push door. His pause, however, gave him a chance to see the shadow of another pair of shoes at the bottom of the door. Jiren must have taken the customer back there. Come to think of it, Izuku hadn't gotten the chance to see back there yet. Was it more store or a workplace? Pressing his hand to the door, he gently pushed and the door gave. It swung slowly thanks to his gentle touch, exposing Jiren facing him. At the sight of Izuku, Jiren's grin faded slightly before quickly returning. He seemed rather desperate for whatever deal he had with the man. The customer was between him and Jiren, his back to Izuku. Nonsense, I tell you. Your order was sent 3 days ago. Surely it must have landed on your doorstep by now. Jiren waved a hand at him, but Izuku didn't understand the gesture. Are you accusing me of lying? Izuku looked at the customer for the first time. Even despite seeing only his back, Izuku could tell the man meant business. He wore showy shoes and a fancy suit, but if you asked Izuku, the fluffy purple boa on his shoulders kind of ruined the look. The straps of a privacy mask could be seen hooked around his ears. His hair was cut short, but it seemed almost spiky. But not in a gelled way, but a strange natural sharpness. Izuku blinked as the man turned his head, catching his gold eyes on Izuku. And who might you be? The man's voice was smooth but pointed, making Izuku shrink in on himself. Izuku didn't see Jiren shaking his head no behind the man. I, Izuku. He gripped the radio in his hands tighter. Everything about this man was sharp, like he was made of razors. The man turned to him fully, obviously eyeing Izuku. Even the fluffy fur boa looked sharp from this angle. Were you the one meant to deliver my package? The man's voice dipped deeper as he glared down at Izuku. And no sir, I only started today. Izuku bit his tongue as the man took a step toward him. He's telling the truth, I haven't even had him sign paperwork yet. Jiren interrupted from the other room, quickly digging around in a pile of papers. Here. Jiren spun around with a thick folder in his hands. Izuku watched as Jiren desperately flicked through the folder before pointing at a name. This man was the Dealboy boy. He's supposed to work again tomorrow. Then I'll be back, and I expect my order to be honored, with some compensation. The man glared at Jiren, making the man shiver. At least Izuku knew his fear was justified. Have a good day. Izuku found himself yelping out as the man marched past him. The man paused in the door before eyeing Izuku over his shoulder. Izuku kept his gaze with him for as long as he could. He knew looking away just made bullies feel good. He couldn't help but flinch and break the staring contest as Jiren wrapped an arm around his shoulder, however. When Izuku looked back, he saw the door swing close as if the man vanished. What a rude customer. Izuku sat at the pawn shop's counter, running a comb through the hair at the end of his tail. He hissed as the comb caught on yet another chunk of tape. At this point, Izuku considered hacking his tail off. With a sigh, Izuku gave up. Looking back to the counter, Izuku began to wait for his next fix-it job. Jiren was busy in the back preparing something, leaving Izuku alone. Glancing out the window, Izuku wondered why Jiren opened a store here. The street was off the main road, leaving it tucked away and hidden. Izuku had barely found it and doubted any casual shopper would. You almost had to know where to look. From the window, Izuku couldn't even see the main road. Instead, the walls of an alley led to the store. The sun barely lit the place due to the after-school hours. Izuku messed with the hem of his shirt as time continued to tick by with nothing happening. Surely someone had to see the shop. Izuku really wanted to prove his worth to Jiren by helping a customer. Everything had a price label on it, so it's not like it would be hard, especially considering the digital encyclopedia backup at the counter. Jiren had already shown him how to operate it and the cash register, so Izuku knew what he was doing. He had even been taught how to use an intercom, a price printer, and other little gadgets. Izuku glared at the empty ally. If only someone would show up. Izuku grumbled and kicked at the legs of the chair he sat on. His hooves clattered not unlike high heels against the wood. He had decided to listen to the family doctor and finally drop the shoes. Izuku found he actually preferred the open hooves. Before, whenever he wasn't in public, he would outright refuse to wear shoes, due to the strange itch they left on his legs. But in public? Sure, he had caught people staring, but it was so liberating. He enjoyed being able to feel the ground under him. The shoes have been in the way. It helped ground him, literally and figuratively. He felt there now. Whether it be in the pawn shop or just walking down a road. Izuku smiled, remembering when he had come in today, without his shoes. Jiren had spotted his hooves but greeted him normally. So what if he had hooves? He was still Izuku. It was nice Jiren understood that. Is your co-worker here? A sharp tone broke his conservation. Izuku looked up, seeing the customer from the day before. The one who delivered your order? I don't really know, maybe he's helping Jiren with something in the back. Izuku answered honestly. He hadn't seen anyone in the shop other than Jiren today. The man nodded before trying to invite himself in the back room. Izuku wasn't even allowed in. Sir, I don't think Jiren wants customers back there. Izuku clambered off his chair and hurried in front of the door to the back rooms, placing a hand on either side of the door frame to block the man. I can call him on the intercom for you. Izuku shivered as the man silently stared at him. This guy was weird. Izuku felt his cheeks redden as the man eyed him up and down, sticking to his tail. I'm surprised Jiren hired someone so unkempt. The man's voice was smoother but somehow angrier. Great, the man was on a first-name basis with the guy. Izuku glanced at his tail. Oh, the tape. It's not by choice, sir. Someone from school thought it would be funny to tape my tail. I can't clean it no matter how hard I try. Izuku tucked his tail behind his legs. He had always been ashamed of his tail, but somehow this guy's judgment felt worse. Allow me to clean it, it's bugging me. The man held out a hand and waited. Izuku blinked. Was this guy for real? Izuku hesitated at the thought of refusing. It couldn't hurt to try. Carefully, Izuku stepped closer to the man and offered his tail. He was surprised at how gently the man took it in his hands. It reminded Izuku of when his doctor would check upon him. The man flipped through the hair thatch on his tail before crudely grabbing the whole thing. Okay, maybe Izuku was wrong. Izuku flinched, preparing to feel a harsh yank. Instead, his tail felt hot, then nothing as the man let go. Opening his eyes, Izuku watched tiny chunks of tape flutter to the floor. Izuku flicked his freed tail. The curly thatch was clean and smooth, making Izuku light up. Thank you, sir. How did you do that? Izuku felt his ears flap and flick with excitement. This guy wasn't that bad at all. The man kept a blank face and raised a hand. Simple, my Quirk. Now will you return my help with a favor? Call for your boss, will you? Oh, that's why he helped. I would have done that anyway, but thank you so much, sir. You have no idea how long I've been plucking tape out of my tail. Izuku hurried over to the intercom. Pressing the button just like Jiren showed him, Izuku leaned close to the little box it was connected to. A customer requires further assistance. Please come to the front. Izuku giggled to himself. He sounded like one of those ladies at Walmart over their intercom. He had practiced his store voice all night the day before. Within a few moments, Jiren's familiar face appeared from the back door. His face lit up, recognizing the customer. Overhaul. Sorry to tell you, but my employee got arrested the other night for theft. I just got a call from him after you left yesterday. Jiren's words obviously displeased the overhaul. However, the man sighed despite his body staying tense as a rock. Is it so? That's too bad. I had hoped to give him a piece of my mind. Overhaul stood straight, making him tower over the room. Izuku hadn't even noticed the man's slouch. Well, will you honor my purchase? Jiren laughed. Of course. Go ahead and look around. I'll offer a 50% discount on whatever you pick. Overhaul nodded and looked to Midoriya. He must want help knowing where to look. Izuku hurried out from behind the counter and trotted over to a display of jewelry. Jiren-sensei has the oldest selection of jewelry in the city. While the new stuff in the shops is pretty, it kinda lacks some charm according to Jiren. Izuku pointed out several pieces Jiren had told him to try and sell before. Jade has been popular this season. Any woman would appreciate a piece. Adhering to a use, another thing Jiren told him to do. Customers were more likely to buy if it seemed dumb not to. Overhaul walked beside him, barely looking at the display. But if you're not interested in fashion, we have tools. They're a bit old but plenty good. Izuku caught sight of Jiren behind the counter. The man gave him a blinding smile and a thumbs up. He was doing a good job. Nutcrackers to craftsman tools dash. What about something more traditional? Overhaul commented. Isuku quickly nodded. This is what Jiren trained him for. Helping customers find what they want, not what the store wants to sell. Of course. Jiren keeps things like that toward the back wall. Izuku didn't see Jiren flinch as he grabbed Overhaul by the sleeve to lead him to the back wall. They get their own section in the store no matter their use, so they are easier to find. Izuku stopped in front of the display and released Overhaul's sleeve. We get new stuff all the time, but right now it's mostly metalwork and stone carvings. A hint to come back to the store another time. Jiren would be so proud. Of course we have some beckoning cat carvings. Izuku picked one of the cats, a black one. The color black is to bring health. Izuku pointed to a trio of white beckoning cats. Their color is for happiness. Lastly, Izuku pointed out a large golden beckoning cat. Rather easily, this one is meant to bring wealth to the owner. Midoriya, Overhaul is actually rather knowledgeable dash. Jiren was cut off by Overhaul. What of the owls? Overhaul asked. Izuku happily smiled, placing back the cat in favor of an owl. The colors mean the same, but the owl itself invokes luck and protection. Newer ideas are that it's for wisdom too, but historians think that just comes from Western influence. Overhaul nodded along to his explanation. Would you like one of the owls? Izuku offered. Overhaul watched him carefully for a moment, his sharp features somewhat softer. What would you get? That question threw Izuku for a loop. He supposed it was a reasonable question to ask, like asking a waiter at a restaurant what their favorite dish is. Izuku looked up at the shelf, trying to see something he could answer with. Along a shelf was round dolls representing animals. They all fit the year animals, for example, the year of the pig, rat, and so forth. Izuku eyed them for a moment, spotting a cow. Well, I suppose that one. Izuku pointed to the round wooden animal. It would definitely fit my style, I guess. Overhaul followed his gaze up to the item. Good enough reason as any, I suppose. Overhaul plucked the cow from the shelf and tested its weight in his hand. I've been needing a paperweight for my desk. Izuku smiled up at the man. Would you like me to help you check out? Overhaul nodded and Izuku led him to the counter. Jiren stood by as Izuku worked the cash register, helping when its drawer got stuck for a second. Izuku blushed and apologized to the two men. Jiren just laughed and brushed it off. Overhaul nodded and pushed his items toward Izuku. Izuku quickly wrapped up the cow after noting its price and halving it. While he slipped the cow into a bag, he took Overhaul's original item in his hands. Because Overhaul had already bought it once before, only for it to be most likely stolen, it didn't have a price. Izuku placed the paper-wrapped box in the bag next to the cow. Jiren had wrapped it in the back. He wondered what it was. Tying the bag quickly, Izuku beamed up at Overhaul and held the bag out for him to take. Jiren patted him on the head as Overhaul took his bag with a bow and, "Thank you." Izuku smiled watching Overhaul go before turning to grin at Jiren. The man chuckled around his cigar and scratched at Izuku's scalp. Good job, kiddo. Just be a little less touchy next time, okay? Izuku blinked. Touchy? Jiren nodded. Yeah, not everyone likes others touching them. You might scare someone off by pulling on their sleeve. Izuku hummed in understanding. Jiren had a point. At least Overhaul's visit gave him some much-needed experience and a lesson. Izuku watched as his classmates filtered out of the school gates. He envied how easily they talked to each other. It was as if every one of them knew each other since BR. Socializing was just so easy for them. Izuku thought back to what Jiren had said about him pulling overhaul along by his sleeve. Many students grabbed and patted each other openly as they laughed. As much as he liked the idea, Izuku didn't really trust people his age. Sure, he was quick to trust, but the greater public seemed so scary. Talking with Jiren or even overhaul was okay, he could focus easily on them. He could try and read their words and face, their body language. It was a struggle, but Izuku thinks he was close to being a good socializer. How did this come so easily to people? Izuku felt his lips turn into their normal shape, a nervous wobble. He slipped away from the crowd of students and adults, quickly running along with his backpack and a little bit of anticipation. What kind of lesson would the pawn shop and its owner bring today? Izuku smiled as he pressed the store's door open. Before he could even enter, he saw a familiar face, next to some new ones. Overhaul was speaking to Jiren, the chat much calmer than their previous talks. The new faces were eyeing some toys on a shelf. There was a man with silver-tipped arrows for hair, his lower face covered by a medical mask. In his arms, happily pointing at an item, was a little girl with red eyes and a sharp horn. Izuku quickly ran behind the counter, hoping that he would be able to help the probable father-daughter pair check out. He watched intently as the pair walked around the shop. A sudden tap on his shoulder made him look to Jiren. His voice was hushed but quick. Either help or do something else than stare. People don't like being watched so closely, little bull. Izuku blushed at being called out but nodded and instead focused himself on a box of items under the counter. How embarrassing. Izuku thinks he saw Overhaul smile under his mask, even just for a moment. Keeping his eyes down now, Izuku noticed a theme of the items. Metal mostly. One box in particularly held bells, the dinging things on drum sets, and Izuku glared at an item. He hadn't the slightest idea what to even compare the thing to. After a glance at Jiren, Izuku carefully plucked the item from a box. It was made of metal. It had a handle attached to a strange metal band that was pierced by 3 bars. The little metal bars moved freely, except their curled ends kept them from slipping out of the contraption. Each bar had several discs that reminded Izuku of the old coins with holes in them. While each bar had these coins, each bar had coins of different thickness. Izuku turned it to the side, flinching as it rang. Almost like a tambourine mixed with a rattle, the item would chime lightly when moved side to side. Izuku smiled at the sound, finding his senses solely focusing in on it. The touch of the cool metal under his fingers, the little vibrations the coins sent into his hand. The ear tingle and chime it sang with. What fascinated him most was the art along it. The 3 different coins had symbols, and the top of the instrument had the figure of a little cow lying at rest. At the top of the handle was a woman's face. She had horns that curved outward and animalistic ears. Izuku noticed the little orange tag Jiren must have tied to it. Strange, the orange tags meant pre-Quirk, Jiren said. Izuku looked at the lady's face. What would an item showing what looked like a mutation Quirk owner plastered on it be doing from the age before Quirks? Jiren-san. Izuku called, not taking his eyes off the appealing item. Its shiny coins song made him feel strange. It felt like sadness, but he couldn't place why such an appealing thing would make him feel sad. A horrible tiredness also melted into his bones, making him shiver. It made him curious. Can I buy this? Izuku finally looked away from the item toward his boss. The only thing was he wasn't there. Izuku looked around the store confused. No one who had been in the shop before was there now. Instead, the shop was empty, quiet. Izuku looked out the shop window and down the alley. Not a soul moved outside. Izuku could see the sky from the store, but instead of the afternoon sun, he saw pitch blackness, not even stars. Despite the dark sky, everything seemed to be lit by a flickering flame. He suddenly found his focus snapping forward. At the other side of the counter was a towering woman. Her face was identical to the woman's on the instrument he held in his hands. Above her head, in between her horns, however, was a flickering flame. It was small and seemed doomed to go out at any second. Looking back at the woman's face, he could see how tired she was. Her skin was tanned, but all along it was silvery scars and marks. It looked like she had been in the sun, as something was laying across her neck. His ears flicked as he heard her sigh heavily. She looked so weak. Her eyes were a solid glowing gold as she watched him. Do you need help? Izuku found himself asking. The woman's mouth didn't move, but a voice filled the room. I've been holding on for so long, my child. Her voice sounded sore. I don't think I can anymore. I want to rest, but I fear if I do I will not awake again. Izuku watched the woman with worry pooling inside him. She looked ready to tumble over. Is there anything I can do? The woman thought long and hard. Izuku wasn't sure she even heard him for a moment. Will you take some of this weight for me? The woman reached up to her neck, and suddenly Isuku could see what had been resting heavily on her shoulders. It was a thick rope. Attached at its end laid a heavy-looking bell. It wasn't a simple cowbell either though. It was the shiniest brass he had ever seen, and across its surface were pictures. People dancing, people laughing, people holding each other close. Izuku looked up to the woman and nodded. She thanked him and lifted the rope over her head and horns. The moment she dropped the heavy rope and bell onto his shoulders she groaned, having to catch herself on the counter as to not fall. Thank you, my child. You have no idea how tired I have become. All I ask is that you hold my bell for as long as you can. Whenever I can I will try and make your burden worthwhile. She sounded breathless still, but oh so much better. Izuku shrugged the rope on his shoulders, testing its weight. He nodded to her words. Izuku loved to help more than everything. He would do this even without a promise of reward. So he told her as such. The woman smiled at him, her laugh filling the air despite her mouth staying still. When I saw you, you reminded me of a young me. Your curled little horns and your little ears. I couldn't help but try and ask you for help, and it seems I was right too. I admit it's silly to trust you, especially since my trust is based on a visual kinship, but it's not like I have much choice anyway. What does that mean? I'm so weak, my child. A moment longer with my bell and I fear I would have faded. Powers of the gods needed to be fueled. Without such fuel powers become nothing but a weight dragging us down. I don't dash. Not now, my child, I need to rest. If I do wake again I'll tell you more. Thank you so much. And just like that, he was suddenly back in the store with all the sounds, all the sights. Izuku blinked owlishly and looked at the item in his hands. The woman's eyes were closed on the carving now, and her face restful. The instrument was called a sistrum. It was in fact a percussion instrument, very much like a rattle. More importantly, though, Izuku found its connection to a certain goddess. Hathor, a goddess often depicted as a cow or with cattle-like traits. When Izuku searched her on Wikipedia, he saw a familiar face in a statue carved to look like said god. Her face was much happier on the stature, more relaxed. She seemed to be a god of many things, to the point some believed she was a kind of god, not an individual. Motherhood, queenship, and music. Izuku thought back to the sistrum. It definitely was devoted to her, most likely due to her link to the music itself. Another point caught his eye though. Joy, she was a goddess of joy. It was strange reading that after meeting her or an aspect of her. She seemed so sad like she was missing something. An idea crossed Izuku's mind. She had said she'd been holding on for a long time. Was a lack of worship the cause? Or was she weakened in some other way like a fight? Izuku scrolled down the wiki page seeing a painting of her. In between her horns was a blazing fire, nothing like the candlelight he had seen. Izuku touched the space around his neck. While not even a mark was there, he could feel the rope and bell on his shoulders. He swore he heard it ring when he stood from his chair. Closing his computer, Izuku wondered if there was anything he could do for the goddess. As of now, his only task was to carry the rope and bell for her. Izuku slipped into his bed, careful to not crush his tail. Curling up under his covers, Izuku sighed. Izuku wormed around in a pool of warm sunlight. Its heat felt wonderful on his naked skin. Naked? Izuku shot up and scrambled to his feet. Strangely thick grass was under his hooves and not his bedroom floor. Izuku glared at the grass, then noticed he had 4 hooves and not 2. Izuku whipped his head around to look at himself. He was a bull. An actual bull. His white, thin fur shone in the sunlight. His hooves were still pale pink. Izuku looked around for answers. He was in a field with other cattle, all of them napping in the sun. Izuku bellowed and began to run around. Had he been kidnapped? If so, why was he a full bull now? Soon Izuku realized no fences trapped him. With his mouth dry, he spotted a wide river not too far away. He walked to the river, hearing the bell on his neck ring the entire way. Izuku flicked an ear, hearing something behind him. The other cows had stood, no doubt awakened by Izuku's panic. They didn't run or charge at him, instead, they walked calmly behind him. Izuku slowed his pace to walk with them. Izuku watched as what had to be the lead cow walked next to him. She was white with golden spots, unlike the pure white cattle behind her and Izuku. Izuku shook his head when green locks teased his eyes. A gold cow and a green bull, what a sight. The end of his tail was the only green on his figure, but still. Soon they all found themselves at the river. That's when Izuku realized he towered over the herd. He was also the only one with a bell. Izuku liked his dry nose before sticking it in the cool river. Instantly the others began to drink as well. Izuku wouldn't be surprised if they drained the river, with the number of them. They all seemed just as thirsty as him. Finally feeling like he had his fill of water, he looked over to the lead cow. She reminded him of the goddess. She had the same horns and ears. She offered him the best a cow could do for a smile. Izuku looked at the spot behind her neck. The mark from a rope scared her skin. It must be her. Or another aspect maybe. Izuku walked through the herd to her, surprised at how polite the cows were to him. "So my child, are you sleeping well?" she asked. Izuku tried to answer, but only a moo escaped his mouth. She nodded, however, understanding him despite his lack of speech. "Yes, you are dreaming, my child." That explained why he was fully a bull now. She laughed, her voice sounding angelic. "It's my first gift to you. My child, the longer you hold my bell, the more I will give." She nodded toward the bell hanging from his neck. "The simplest of my powers, shifting into a cow, but for you, it will be a bull," she explained. "I figured it would be the best place to start, easy but useful. You will have the strength of a bull in this form, and a little more. Cattle are much stronger than men." Hather flicked her tail toward the herd. "Use it to protect others, like a bull does its herd." Izuku nodded. Helping others is all he's ever wanted to do. He thanked her the best he could. With her gift, he could actually do something before he was way too weak. She tisked at him. "You are stronger than you think, my child." Izuku didn't understand, but she turned away from him. "Rest now, my child, you have many to protect." Izuku awoke, shaking his head. His ears flopped around as he did. He had dreamt something. Izuku stared at his wall, trying to remember what it was. It felt important. Izuku blinked, remembering an image. He knew it was him despite its strange shape. It was that of a bull. It resembled none of the traditional cattle he saw on TV before. Its ears were long and its horns curled down and in, just like his. But its shoulders had a hump, and its skin looked less furry than the milk cows in books. "Nagori," a voice supplied. "They came from Rajasthan, hardy beasts they are, acclimated to the heat and dry." Hather's voice whispered, growing quieter as he woke up. So if he was asleep or waking, the goddess could speak to him, at least for right now. Despite her now being silent, he could feel her smile. She was proud of her pick then. Izuku smiled. Despite his appearance, he didn't know much about cattle. He would trust her judgment. Izuku happily entered the pawn shop after another day at school. Everyone had been staring at him, confused at his new joy. It was weird, like he wasn't allowed to be happy or something. At the pawn shop, however, Jiren worked to make him happy. Jiren cared, at least a little. Izuku smiled as his boss waved him to the counter. After a quick greeting, the man pressed a bag into his hands. "Today I'm going to show you in back, but with all the chemicals your school uniform isn't exactly safe," Jiren explained. "Go ahead and get dressed in the bar next door. I asked the owner to let you in through the back." Izuku looked inside the bag, instantly understanding what the older man was going on about. A pair of heavy boots, overalls, a shirt, large RBB gloves, and even a pair of safety glasses stared back up at him. Izuku smiled and nodded quickly, running off to a door Jiren pointed out. The pawn shop and the bar shared a wall, so the back door was more of a wall into another room. Albeit the pawn shop was smaller, that makes Izuku think the pawn shop is the extra room. The bar wasn't massive by any means, but it was definitely bigger than the pawn shop, more popular too. People sat at a counter and in seats all around the place, sipping away. With a quick look around, Izuku spotted a door with a bathroom sign over it. But as Izuku went to enter, a man stepped in his way. "Ah, not this one, Dash." The man's voice was low and raspy. "Jiren and his friends get to use the one upstairs, the clean one." The man, more like an older teen now that Izuku looked at him, had wispy white hair that stopped at his ears. He was lanky, and the well-fitting black clothes certainly didn't help hide that fact. The teen flicked his head, motioning for Izuku to follow. Izuku held the bag close to his chest as the older pushed open a door in the bar. Jiren knew these guys, the man even mentioned him by name, so it had to be okay. Still, being around a new person made Izuku's gut flip. Would he be mean? Would he treat Izuku like an animal? However, his fears weren't justified, as the tall teen walked behind him up a set of stairs. The first door on the right was the bathroom he had mentioned. It was also, in fact, clean. It looked more like a home's bathroom than a bar's. "The space up here is where I and some others live. It's off limits to customers." The teen flicked on the room's light for him before eyeing him up and down. "Oh, that explains it." Izuku must have talked out loud. Izuku was about to enter the room to change when the teen blocked his path. "You seem a bit young to be in this part of town. Jiren didn't kidnap you from somewhere, did he?" The teen's face was serious, and Izuku was sure if the man had fur it would be sticking up on end. Izuku laughed, from the mix of nerves and what had to be a joke. "Boss? That man has been nothing but nice to me. I doubt he could do anything so horrible. He's way too nice." The boy didn't laugh with him, only watched him with wide red eyes. You are pretty new around here, aren't you?" Izuku nodded, not ashamed of the fact. "I'm doing my best to learn though. Being in the shopping district as something other than a customer is pretty new to me, but I'm trying my best." Izuku felt his tail smack his legs as he wagged it. "Tamura." The boy looked down, his face hidden by his bangs. It was Izuku's turn to blink. "Huh. I'm Tamura. If you ever need anything, tell the bartender to get me, okay?" The boy's voice changed, almost seemingly shy for a moment before he stood straight and finished talking. "Thank you. It's good to meet you, Tamura. My name is Izuku." Izuku offered the taller boy his hand. Despite some hesitation and a blush, the boy obliged, only partly grasping Izuku's hand. Izuku smiled as Tamura stepped aside, bowing slightly as Izuku closed the bathroom door behind him. Izuku got changed as fast as he could, eager to not make Jiren wait too long. The boots and shirt were form-fitting, but the overalls seemed a size too big. The gloves felt baggy, but Izuku was pretty sure that was normal. Izuku placed the glasses in the chest pocket of the overalls for now. Izuku opened the bathroom door, surprised to see Tamura still there, although stepped a bit away to give Izuku privacy. "You know those are lab gloves? You don't have to wear them out here." Tamura pointed at his. Izuku blushed and tugged the gloves off, tucking them into his pockets. Sorry." Tamura blushed too for some reason. "It's fine, just don't want you getting in trouble." Tamura and Izuku stood for a moment unsure. "I'll walk you back," announced Tamura. Izuku nodded and smiled. "Okay." Tamura sped past and down the stairs, only stopping at the door to wait for Izuku. His new boots clattered despite the firm hold they had on his hooves. Izuku held tightly on the stairs railing as he tried to descend. "I don't know if those are a good idea, you might fall." Sure enough, Izuku stumbled at Tamura's words. Both he and Tamura star-fished on the set of stairs, bracing themselves. Luckily Izuku held on, giving a nervous laugh to the boy below. Why did he feel so awkward all of a sudden? He couldn't stop stuttering and mumbling, and now he was stumbling? Izuku felt like a reek. Izuku blinked, surprised seeing Tamura offer him a hand. With how strange he had acted, Izuku had been sure he didn't want to touch Izuku. Izuku smiled and took the boy's hand, thanking him as he wobbled down the steps, not noticing the boy had tucked in his thumb for some reason. Once Izuku was safely off the stairs, Tamura didn't let go, Instead, he led Izuku out the door and back into the pawn shop by the hand. Izuku was sure his face was beet red as Jiren greeted him and Tamura. "Ah, you met the brat, huh?" Jiren sneered. Izuku flinched, not expecting Jiren to call him. "I mean you met Tamura, kiddo. Don't be fooled, the kid is spoiled." "I am not spoiled, old man." Tamura practically screeched. "Ah, that's why Tamura asked Izuku if Jiren kidnapped him." Tamura and Jiren just didn't get along at all. Izuku couldn't help but laugh, a little relieved. For a second he had actually thought Jiren was a criminal or something. Izuku felt Tamura's hand clench around his. "You actually don't know." The teen looked down at him, seemingly shell-shocked. Izuku sat in a chair in the back of the pawn shop as Jiren and Tamura argued about something in the store. Through the door, Izuku got snippets of the conversation, just enough to guess that the argument was about him. His name came constantly, always followed by angry words. However, Izuku could guess what it was about now. Izuku didn't know everything, but he was well adept in topics he had an interest in. While the storage was full of items being prepared to sell, there were also weapons. Ones that looked new and ready to hurt. Izuku knew for a fact weapons like those were not allowed to be sold so close to major malls like the shopping district. Plus, there was no way the items fit into a normal pawnshop stock. Maybe if they were old and rotten guns from a past war, then maybe. Izuku gulped, staring at a case of guns, their barrels shiny. They were modern, a little advanced even. Below the case was a shelf stocked with admonitions. However, Izuku didn't feel afraid of the men in the front room. The things were meant for sale. The thick rope keeping them stuck on safety made sure that arming them would take time. On the nicer side, Izuku could see a variety of mechanical limbs. They were all normal-shaped limbs. Simple hands and legs to connect to anyone needing them. It wasn't exactly a shop of horrors. More of a get-it-all kind of store. If Izuku wasn't mistaken, he could even see some of those MRE meals that campers use for emergency rations. Honestly, the back room of the pawnshop reminded Izuku of those doomsday rooms you see in zombie movies. All preparation to be safe. So, despite the probably less than legal side of it, Izuku wasn't all that bothered. Izuku sat in the chair, patiently kicking his feet a little to curb his boredom. Izuku perked up hearing the door's room open. The only thing was, Overhaul stepped inside and not Jiren or Tamura. Izuku was surprised but instantly stood to greet the man properly. "Overhaul, it's good to see you again. Because Jiren is busy, maybe I can help you back here today?" Izuku smiled and held his hands together by his waist. He had seen a lady at a store to this to greet a customer. It might do good for him to do the same thing. Just like the lady did, he offered Overhaul a short bow. Overhaul blinked but returned the bow. I don't see why you couldn't help me." Overhaul eyed the door he came through, Jiren and Tamura's arguing still audible. "Do you know what stirred those two up?" Overhaul asked, looking back at him. Izuku shrugged, more focused on the man's change of outfit. Instead of a suit and privacy mask, Overhaul wore a thick pilot's coat with a purple fringe. His breaths were plain black but his shoes were a clean white. Most eye-catching of all, however, was the mask. It was a beak, red with a gold frame and studs on its sides. It held tight on Overhaul's face as the man tilted his head at Izuku. The man had asked something. "No, not really, but I think it has to do with Dash." Izuku motioned to the gun case. "Me seeing all that." "Strange, that's for sure." Overhaul hummed. "It's not like you are a child, you know not to mess with guns." "Oh, I think it's because shops aren't exactly allowed to sell this kind of thing so deep in the city," Izuku added. "Ah, you have a point now, Dash." Overhaul brushed off his sleeves despite nothing had dirted them. "I actually came to see you." That made Izuku pause. "Me?" Izuku felt himself begin to curl upon himself. "Did I mess up your items the other day?" Izuku remembered how mad the man had been the first time they met. Izuku had never found out what happened to Jiren's Dielvoy boy. No, you did just fine." Overhaul waved the idea away with a gloved hand. "I was just wondering if you would be up for hire? I don't plan to steal you from Jiren, but I can't ignore the fact I need a little help." Overhaul began to explain. "You see, with my work I'm constantly running around and have no time to do more domestic things." Overhaul leaned against the frame of the door. My adoptive father, he's gotten a granddaughter now, the one I had with me the other day. Izuku nodded. He had only seen the girl for a moment before he had to run home, too sick from Hather's visit to stand. Overhaul nodded, seemingly happy. She's quite energetic, too much so for my coworkers to handle along with their job. I'm in the market for hiring a babysitter. Overhaul motioned to Izuku. I figured it wouldn't hurt to offer the position to you first, as I have at least met you once or twice over a stranger. Izuku supposed that was reasonable enough. Izuku knew his mother used to send him next door to her friend over hiring some rando. I'm up to try. I can't promise I'll be any good though, I've never exactly babysitter before. Izuku worked for his hands together, honored for being considered, but afraid to disappoint. That's all I could ever ask of you. Would you like to meet her then decide work hours then? Overhaul offered. Izuku nodded. Yeah, I'd hate to plan a time only to end up backing out on you. Overhaul's eyes made it clear the man was smiling. Of course, why don't I give you my number? Call me when you are open to coming over, I can pick you up from school? The last part was more of a question. Izuku pulled out his phone. Sure. I'll text you the school's name and address. It'll make sure we got the numbers right. Sure enough, after a moment when Izuku texted out the info and hit send, Overhaul's phone pinged. The man nodded, satisfied. I'll make sure to stay on my toes, that way I can retrieve you myself. Izuku smiled and wagged his tail. That sounds perfect. Izuku blushed when his tail thumped against a box. Luckily it stayed in place, but it did give Izuku a good spook. Izuku blushed even harder though as Overhaul laughed, a hand trying to cover his mouth despite the fact he was wearing a mask. Izuku grabbed his tail and held it to his chest. Oops! Izuku smiled as wide as he could. A silent, don't tell gyen held in his smile. Overhaul nodded as his laugh stifled into a light huff. Izuku could tell his blush never left, even when Overhaul did. He really needed to keep control of his tail. The last thing he needed to do was to sweep something off a shelf and it breaking. Izuku wondered if his classmate had the right idea by taping it to his back. Tamura peeked his head into the back room with a tired expression. Hey, the old man decided to close early. Unless you want to be back here all night, I suggest you come on out. Tamura's voice sounded just as tired as his face looked. Izuku called after the boy as he rushed out the back room. Tamura? The boy hummed, prompting Izuku to keep going. Did you and gyen come to a conclusion or? Tamura paused mid-step. Kinda. The boy looked back at him. We figured it would be best to ease you into dash. All the illegal stuff? Izuku asked, entering the main room fully. He heard gyen sputter at the front door. Yuppie, I forgot you had a good head on ya? The older man growled to himself more than Izuku. Yeah dash, Tamura grit his teeth. All the illegal stuff. Izuku nodded, feeling the room's atmosphere thicken. I don't want to hurt good people, but I'm not opposed to keeping good people safe. Izuku stared at the blackboard as his teachers scrawled words across it. Tonight Overhaul was going to bring him to his place so Izuku could babysit his. Did she count as his niece? His boss appointed him but had a child that had another child, making the kid Overhaul's boss's granddaughter. That felt more confusing than it should be. He'd just ask Overhaul later tonight. Izuku jumped back into focus, his ears flopping over his shoulders as he did. His teacher stared at him harshly through a pair of glasses. Izuku felt a tremor run from his head to the tip of his tail. His teacher seemed to have it out for him today. Izuku found he preferred being ignored like he had been the past week. What had changed? Izuku glanced around, spotting some of his classmates staring at him as well. They always looked away quickly, but it was obvious eyes were on him. For one reason or another. Izuku doubted it was a good one. Izuku quickly got permission to run to the bathroom. Izuku rushed as fast to the lonely bathroom as he could without getting yelled at for running. Once inside, he quickly ran to one of the stalls. He instantly looked himself up and down, trying to see if someone had stuck something on him. Tape? Glue? Izuku grimaced. Gum? Izuku shook the idea out of his head. Izuku looked all over, even craning his neck around to try and see his back. Yet there was nothing. So why was everyone staring? Izuku sighed and sat on the toilet lid. He wasn't dirty, so what was the big deal? Izuku blinked at his own hooves. Izuku had a thought cross his mind. He had been so afraid of people bullying him for them, yet they hadn't. Come to think of it, he hadn't been stalked or harassed all week. His hooves couldn't be the reason. He was sure his bullies would have loved mocking them. Izuku reached up to ruffle his own hair. It hung between his eyes and covered most of his horns afterwards. Izuku watched the stall door through his hair. Izuku growled, frustrated he could come up with an answer. Izuku let his legs flail in the air, and he had his mini temper tantrum. It wasn't fair. How could people read each other so easily? Understand what different looks meant? It just wasn't fair. Izuku broke out with a yelp as his hoof connected with the stall door, its wood cracking, and its hinges screeching. Izuku froze as the door shuddered before stopping, only to drop to the floor with a bang. Izuku looked at the fallen door, half expecting it to rise again and lunge at him. Instead, it just sat on the floor, doing nothing. Izuku scooted to the end of the toilet and poked his head out of the stall, eyeing the door. Izuku blinked hearing the hand dryers turn on. Another student just as shocked as he was stood by the hand dryers, his eyes going from Izuku to the door. I didn't mean to dash, Izuku cut off as the boy raised his hands. You don't have to tell me twice, my lips are sealed. The boy sped from the bathroom, Izuku just now recognizing him as a teacher's assistant. Shouldn't he be scolding Izuku for destroying school property? Izuku stood up and carefully walked around the now broken door. Even though he hadn't actually gone, Izuku still washed and dried his hands, all the while glancing over at the fallen door. He did that. He didn't even mean to, yet he did that. Izuku returned his gaze back to the mirrors. Izuku was small and still was, but Izuku looked thicker. At first, he mistook it for fat, but it wasn't. He was no longer a toothpick. Instead, his body was broader and thick, but not too much to make him look strange. He looked like a bull. A young one with a rounded face, but still. His figure also reminded him of the naturally strong. Not the bodybuilders with weird figures and bulging veins. More like a construction worker you see randomly lifting a manhole cover with one hand like it was a soda bottle. Izuku allowed himself a moment longer watching himself. Come to think of it, the inside of his ears were a bit pinker too. Izuku flicked one, thinking maybe it just needed to cool off. But nope, a noticeable blush was set in his ears. Izuku touched the pinkness, finding that it was warm, but he was unable to cool it by flicking like he usually could. Was he getting a fever maybe? Izuku essayed in a breath. If he was getting sick, he couldn't go help overhaul. What if he got the man sick? Izuku quickly whipped out his phone and began texting the older man, surprised when he got an answer right away. Oh, are you sure? Does this kind of thing sneak up on you usually? No. That's why I'm worried it might be something bad. Oh, alright, don't worry about babysitting today, but I'm picking you up after school. I'll take you to the closet clinic. Sound good? I don't want to keep you though. You said you were busy. Oh, my paperwork isn't as important as your health, it can wait. Izuku considered the idea. Would he even feel good enough to walk all the way to a clinic by himself later? Izuku sighed. Okay, but only if you swear to deep clean your car after. I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I got someone sick. Oh, a light, if it really is that bad, do you think you should check out of school? Izuku grimaced. I would need a parent to pick me up, and my mom and dad aren't around for that. Overhaul's silence bothered Izuku. They didn't leave me or anything. My dad just works overseas, and my mom works constantly. Oh, that's good to hear. Your school day should be over soon anyway, I suppose. Izuku glanced at the clock on his phone. Overhaul had a point, only 2 hours to go. Oh, take it easy and I'll meet you at the gate. Thank you, sorry for bothering you. Oh, get back to class and don't worry about bothering me. Izuku sat on a medical table, unsure what to think. Overhaul had kept his word in bringing him to a clinic. It's just the man failed to tell Izuku it was his clinic. Turns out the man had more than a fair bit of medical knowledge. Izuku eyed the walls, looking at the range of medical equipment. It looked exactly like the rooms doctors treated you in, just more stuck. Instead of just a few tools, large machines were lingering around the place. The room was easily the size of his entire home. Overhaul was at a desk typing away at a computer, now and then asking Izuku basic questions on his health. Izuku figured it made sense. Whatever Jiren and everyone were doing wasn't all that legal. So it stands that they couldn't exactly just walk into a hospital. Izuku's ears perked up hearing Overhaul's chair move. The man wheeled over to him with an item in his hand. "Say, fa," Overhaul said, moving closer. Izuku obeyed, albeit with a blush. As much as it made sense, it was a bit embarrassing to have someone he knew to stare down his throat. Overhaul hummed and backed off, allowing Izuku to breathe. "Blood pressure is good, heart rate normal, and your temperature is well within healthy bounds." Overhaul scratched at his chin, obviously thinking of what Izuku was struggling with. The cool lighting made the man's gloves a blinding white. Come to think of it, Overhaul seemed to be glowing. His eyes were more gold than normal, like they had been polished. Even his hair looked lighter. Izuku watched as Overhaul returned to his computer, mumbling about something. Izuku watched the back of the man's head as he worked. Overhaul's hair was standing on end, despite the fact Izuku felt so warm. Was it Izuku or Overhaul who was off about the temperature? The man obviously had a bit of a chill, but Izuku found himself constantly flicking his ears. Izuku liked his teeth, his mouth suddenly feeling off. Izuku glared at the idea. Overhaul clearly just looked at his mouth. There was no way he had dry mouth, Overhaul would have told him. Izuku huffed, annoyed at the strangeness his body was making him put up with. He didn't mind the strength all that much, but this non-fever stuff? If he was sick, just let him be sick, dang it. Izuku ground his teeth, already done with all the nonsense. He just wanted to feel better, but how was he supposed to get better if he didn't know what was going on? At least if it was a cold, he could take some medicine. "Has this happened before?" Overhaul asked. "No." Izuku felt bad that it came out as a growl. "It was sudden, right? Out of nowhere." Overhaul continued, seemingly unbothered by Izuku's accidental rudeness. "Yeah, in the middle of class I just felt dash." Izuku tried to think of a word, grasping his hands like he could snatch the answer from thin air. "I don't know, and I don't like that I don't know." Izuku brought his knees to his chest, the best he could at least. "You said you were 17, right? Have you hit PBRDY yet?" Overhaul didn't look away from the computer. Izuku felt his brain blue screen. He in fact had, and he had hated it. "Yeah, I was the pimpleiest kid in class." Overhaul hummed at his answer, nodding as he typed something into the computer. "It can't be that then. For a moment there I thought I had figured you out." Overhaul sighed, sounding disappointed. "Overhaul." Izuku looked at the man's face as he turned to look at him. "Yes." The man prompted him to continue his question. "Could it be a Quirk thing? Like, Quirk PBRY or something?" Izuku could tell the man had to hold back a laugh, only for his face to become serious again. "Actually, Quirk evolutions aren't unheard of. You might be onto something." Overhaul leaned back in his chair. "Anything lead you to that conclusion?" The man watched him and Izuku felt his ears flush again. "Well, I did bulk up pretty fast. Normally I struggle to keep fat, let alone muscle." Izuku offered. Overhaul quickly moved his chair in front of Izuku. The man looked at Izuku's ankles, even taking one in his hands and manipulating it. "I thought you were walking a bit different. Maybe that's because of a weight change?" Overhaul seemed focused on the puzzle Izuku had put before him, completely oblivious of the fact he was sat between Izuku's legs. As bad as it felt to admit to himself, Izuku almost wanted to keep him there. Izuku blushed as a dirty thought settled in his mind. "Yeah, my legs got thicker, so it's been a bit weird getting up or sitting down." Overhaul instantly moved his hands from his ankle to his lower leg, thumbing over the muscles there. "Muscles are rather defined here, were they before?" Overhaul was completely oblivious. "Not at all, they were twiggy at best." Izuku leaned closer to the man, keeping an eye on him. Suddenly Overhaul let go, something visibly clicking in his eyes. He looked at Izuku, who currently was above him. With Izuku sitting on a desk and Overhaul in a chair, Izuku was looking down at the man. Overhaul eyed him carefully, and Izuku thinks his eyes were a bit wider than normal. Despite the fact they were no longer touching, they were close. In fact, Izuku could even see his own breath ruffle Overhaul's bangs. Ah, maybe you should try and sleep it off, yes? Overhaul offered. Izuku didn't say anything, just watched as Overhaul stayed in his spot. Surely the man would back off if he was uncomfortable, right? Is that the only way to fix it? Izuku asked, full well already knowing the answer. No, but it may be a bit brash for you to. I don't believe we even know each other's full names. Overhaul seemed to be stumbling over his own words. Izuku Midoriya. Izuku found he liked seeing the composed Overhaul struggle to get words out. Kai Chisaki. Izuku smiled as he flipped the open sign to closed. Jiren usually had the shop open into the latest hours of the night, but I got to go to a customer, the man had explained. The heavy box in his arms had to be delivered. Izuku had offered to deliver it himself, but Jiren declined the offer with a smile. Why don't you see if Shigaraki is up to hanging out? I'm sure the brat would love to see you again. Jiren left then, not leaving room for argument. Izuku stared at the now closed shop. Shigaraki? Who was that? Izuku pondered it for a moment before recalling Jiren also called Tamura a brat. Izuku nodded to himself and flicked off the store's lights as he slipped into the bar from the connecting door. Instantly the smell hit him. Copper. The bar hadn't a person inside, not even behind the bar. The more worrying part was the copper smell. It smelled like someone had bled. Had there been a bar fight? Izuku knew that happened in movies all the time, but he wasn't so sure. All the furniture was sat in their proper place, even table decorations sat proper. Not a single bottle behind the bar was shifted too. Each sat pretty with their labels proudly shown. So why did it smell like blood? The floor was clean of dirt, but then Izuku noticed something. 2 holes had been jabbed into the hardwood floor. It almost looked like a giant snake had taken a bite at the ground. Izuku walked over to the strange holes. The sound of his hooves clacking against the floor filled the otherwise silent room. They were deep. Izuku could see a fraction of the subfloor through them. Despite their depth, the holes were thin, but not round. It looked like someone stabbed the floor. Izuku stared at the holes befuddled. Who would stab a floor of all things? And twice? Izuku jumped as the door to the upper bar squealed open. Whipping around to see who it was, he saw Tamura. To say the teen looked tired would be an understatement. His head hung and his shoulders were stiff but dropped. He didn't even notice Izuku for a long moment. When he did, the teen almost instantly perked up. Izuku. The teen's shoulders melted a little. Izuku noticed the twin bandages on each shoulder. Tamura, are you okay? Izuku ran over to the taller teen and grabbed his face. Izuku used a hand to sweep the boy's bangs out of his face. Izuku looked between Tamura's tired but now relaxed eyes. Unexpectedly, Izuku found himself supporting the boy's weight. Tamura practically laid on him, letting out a big sigh. I'm fine. Tamura's voice was muffled as he pressed his face into Izuku's neck. What happened? I smelled blood. Izuku hugged the boy and dragged him over to the bar so he could sit. In any other circumstance, Izuku probably would have laughed at how Tamura just let himself be picked up, his feet dragging uselessly across the floor. Jiraiya felt the need to pin me to the floor with a knife at either side of my head. Tamura didn't elaborate more despite Izuku wishing he would. Izuku managed to slump the limp teen into a bar stool. Tamura. Izuku didn't know how to express his sympathy. So Izuku just hugged the boy, trying not to break into a sob. His friend got hurt and Izuku had done nothing. The only thing separating the bar and the shop was a thick wall and door. Izuku felt useless. How did he let a friend get hurt so close to him? He should have heard the fight. Izuku snuggled into Tamura more for himself at this point. He let his herd get hurt. Hather should be ashamed of him. Izuku sniffled, hugging Tamura tighter. He failed as a bull. Izuku, too tight. Tamura's strained voice filled Izuku's ears, making him let go instantly. Sorry. Izuku stammered. Izuku patted Tamura's sides as if doing so would heal the tight squeeze he succumbed them to. I should have heard, should have done something. Izuku sniffled. Tamura sighed before hugging him. It's okay, can you grab me a water? It's what I came down here for. Sorry. Izuku pulled away from the boy and quickly ran around the bar counter. The water was easy to find inside the bar's fridge. Izuku just as quickly returned to Tamura, even opening the bottle for him. Tamura thanked him and took the bottle, taking a big drink from it. The teen nearly halved it in one go. Izuku blushed, feeling dumb. Not only had he failed to protect Tamura, but he had also gotten in the way of Tamura taking care of himself. Is there anything else I can do for you? Izuku asked, hoping there would be something. Tamura took a moment to think before nodding. Think you can carry me up the steps? I'm really tired. Despite not really understanding where the sudden inability to walk came from, Izuku obeyed. Izuku was as gentle as he could manage to be as he held Tamura to his chest. The teen wrapped around him like a blanket, arms around Izuku's neck and legs around his waist. Walking up the stairs, Izuku realized just how thin and light Tamura really was. It was like carrying a basket of laundry at most. Tamura seemed pleased though, humming contentedly against Izuku's shoulder. Once at the top, Izuku moved to peel the teen off, only for Tamura to hold tight. Tamura? Izuku felt his face and ears turn red. Tamura's breath made Izuku's ears flick. I don't know where you want to go. Izuku stared at the hallway of doors, confused. Apparently, it wasn't just a ride up the steps anymore. That's okay though, Izuku didn't mind providing for Tamura. It was the least he could do after failing to protect the teen. Tamura quietly gave Izuku directions to a door further into the building. It wasn't far at all, simply the last door on the left. Opening the door, Izuku found himself looking into what was obviously a bedroom. Tamura must want to sleep his wounds off. Izuku walked him to the bed under this assumption. Sure enough, as soon as Izuku leaned against the bed and Tamura felt the plush surface, the teen slid off him. Tamura wiggled further back on the bed, not bothering to slip under the covers. Izuku watched as Tamura let out a satisfied sigh as he sank into the bed. Izuku stood there unsure what to do at this point. He wanted to help Tamura, but he felt like he was invading the teen's privacy. Izuku's ears perked up as Tamura patted the space next to him on the bed. Hesitantly, and very carefully, Izuku crawled onto the bed next to Tamura. Izuku fully expected to just lay next to each other, but Tamura just had to go and prove him wrong. The moment he laid down, Tamura began poking at his horns. Will these always be so small? The boy's voice sounded tired and raspy, and oh so too close. Not sure, might grow, might not. It was an honest answer. As much as Izuku would love a majestic pair of horns, they might stay tiny. I hope they don't any bigger. You can't cuddle if you end up like one of those Texas Longhorns. Tamura's words make Izuku's mind blank. He did have a point. At the length his horns were at now, they merely hugged his head, almost hidden in his curly hair. Izuku suddenly came to a realization. Wait, did you look up cows or something? Izuku looked at the other teen just in time to watch a blush creep across his face. So he did. Izuku laughed, earning a pouty lip from Tamura. Well, your ears looked different from all lost cows in the carton, so I got curious. Tamura defended himself, the pout audible in his voice. Holstein, the white ones with black spots you see everywhere? Holstein cattle, they are mainly milk cows. Izuku explained. Tamura nodded. So, what are you? Tamura asked. Izuku just smiled. Come on. Don't make me look up more. Tamura flopped across Izuku, making the shorter teen laugh. The four-stomach thing already traumatized me. Izuku laughed. Wait until you learn about cud. Tamura wailed dramatically before burying his face in Izuku's side. Izuku smiled at the other teen's antics. Izuku rolled from his side onto his back, laughing. Tamura apparently decided that was a challenge and tried to push Izuku off the bed. Izuku laughed harder as Tamura desperately tried to shove him to the bed's edge. Despite the fact Tamura was taller, the boy was lanky and lightweight. Izuku was short and stocky and heavy with his new muscle mass. Tamura couldn't even roll Izuku over, much less push him off the bed. Despite the pushing, it was clear Tamura was having fun, biting back laughs as he failed to move Izuku from his spot. Izuku giggled and moved to his stomach before pressing his head into Tamura's side. With little effort, he sent Tamura tumbling off the bed like a fighter getting thrown out of the ring. Izuku bellowed a laugh as Tamura squealed, sliding onto the floor. The teen crawled back onto the bed, immediately taking another shot at Izuku. This time Tamura grabbed Izuku around the waist, tugging at Izuku trying to drag him to the edge. Izuku laughed, allowing the teen to pull him at least a little. He didn't want to hurt Tamura's pride after all. The older teen, however, seemed unable to move Izuku on his own. So to allow the teen to have his fun, Izuku sort of crab-crawled as Tamura pulled him around. Soon Tamura let go and scrambled to the other side of Izuku to push him off. Izuku smiled, ready to get shoved off the bed. Izuku coughed as Tamura head-butted him in the ribs, sending him off the bedside. Izuku hit the floor with a thunk as Tamura cackled down at him from the bed. "That's what you get." Tamura was beaming down at him, making Izuku forget about his, now probably bruised, side. Izuku nodded, laughing himself. Seemed like he at least cheered up the other teen. "I've been struck down." Izuku arched his back on the floor, making himself look like deer hit by a car. Oh, what a miserable fate. Above him, Tamura rolled his eyes. Looking down at him, Tamura's face was framed by his white hair. Izuku couldn't help but think he looked pretty. "Come on, drama queen, get back up here so I can toss you off again." Tamura flopped on the edge of the bed, arms crossing so Tamura could rest his head on them. With that move, Tamura as directly under a ceiling light, making his hair glow like a halo. It wasn't fair that the boy looked so pretty. "Are you an angel? Here to take me away?" "Okay," that comment made Tamura cackle. The teen nearly fell off the bed in his laughter. Izuku beamed up at him, watching tears prick at the edge of Tamura's eyes. "The farthest thing from it." Tamura calmed his laugh, reaching down to Izuku. "Maybe I'm here to drag you to the underworld. Think of that one?" Tamura grinned with mischief. "Sound good, honestly, as long as it's you taking me." Izuku reached up, taking Tamura's hands in his own. He didn't notice the careful grip Tamura had on him, a pinky raised. Tamura smiled down at him, seemingly glowing, or was that the ceiling light again? Izuku ended up spending the night with Shigaraki. They didn't do that much, but it was fun nonetheless. Tamura showed him his games even. They played one or two for a while until finally going to bed. Tamura had even walked him into the guest room, showing him where all the extra blankets and pillows were. It was cool. It was like a house was attached to the bar. Despite being in a new place, Izuku managed to fall asleep quickly. The surplus of blankets kept him warm and comfortable. Izuku sniffed as he felt something clamber into the bed with him. Despite the sleep gluing his eyes, he managed to look at the figure. Tamura was grinning down at him. "Good morning. You sleep okay?" Tamura seemed to be bounding with energy despite the probable early hours. "Murr." Izuku broke into a yawn and stretch as Tamura began digging him out of bed. "Come on. Breakfast is already done. Once we eat we can play more games." Tamura ended up tugging on Izuku. He was sure that if Tamura could drag him out of bed he would have. "Breakfast? Already?" Izuku followed Tamura out of the bed. "How do you have the energy to eat?" Izuku wobbled to his feet. Tamura's hand was instantly in his and the teen was leading him away. "I've never had anyone over, it's exciting. I could barely fall asleep last night." Tamura proudly bossed. Izuku eyed the bar as they entered. It was empty aside from the misty bartender. Soft morning light filtered in from the stained glass windows. The light left splotches of color everywhere. The bar was warm, and the smell of food hung in the air. Izuku looked to the bar counter as Tamura led him there. Across the wood counter was a range of sugary food. There was French toast, but it was thick and looked to have been done in a pan. Kurogiri soaks the bread in whisked eggs before frying them. "It's the only way I can stand eating eggs," Tamura explained. The teen quickly served himself a plate of the thick-cut toast. Izuku watched as he poured what looked like fresh simmered fruit. But the teen didn't stop there. Next, powdered sugar and maple syrup assaulted the toast. Did that even count as toast anymore? Izuku watched who he assumed was Kurogiri placed a plate by a chair. The misty man motioned for Izuku to sit. "You still seem rather tired. Would you like something to wake you?" the man offered. Izuku nodded. "Iced coffee? The warm stuff doesn't agree with me." Izuku saw the man's eyes arch in a smile. "You don't need to explain yourself, especially if it's because of a dietary reason." The man's voice was understanding. "I can't drink coffee at all. I have to resort to teas." Izuku watched as the misty figure began the process of cold brewing. I can't drink coffee, Tamura added next to him. Izuku smiled at the boy seeing him slurp down some orange juice. Makes my head hurt. Izuku smiled as he started to make his own plate. It was nice, not being made fun of for the things he ate or drank. Once the kids at school realized he was drinking iced coffee and made the biggest deal about it. It made him feel bad about it until Mom reminded him that he wasn't doing it to try and be grown up like the kids said he was. That made him feel a lot better. Izuku patted himself down, finding his phone quickly and turning it on. Izuku blinked at the screen as it stared back at him, blank. Mom hadn't noticed he wasn't home last night. Izuku didn't know why that made him sad. He wondered if she went right to bed last night. Her job did tire her out a lot. It wouldn't be out of the ordinary for her to crash at a friend's ether. He wondered if he should just move out, it would probably be easier on her anyways. They barely saw each other anymore, so it's not like much would change even. Izuku sighed, letting his hand rest on his leg. Tamura stopped mid-chew to look at him. The teen gulped down his mouth full. Everything okay? Izuku jumped back into the moment. Oh, yeah. Just dash. Izuku didn't know what to say. He felt bad but didn't know why. Just tired still. Izuku could see that no one in the room bought his answer. They didn't press, however. If you need anything, let me know. Any friend of Tamura's is also one of mine, Kurogiri said as he slid Izuku his fresh-made coffee. Izuku thanked him and started to eat. Maybe a full stomach would make him feel better. Izuku blushed, slipping into too tight clothes. Due to staying over unplanned, Izuku needed to borrow Tamura's clothes. The hoodie fit him more like a tight dress, long but way too tight. Izuku yelped as a knock sounded on the guest room's door. Young Izuku? Are you all right? Kurogiri asked from outside. Why yeah, I just don't think I can wear this. Izuku tugged at the hoodie despite the fact he knew it wasn't going to get bigger. Why don't you hand me your clothes through the door? I'll see if I can find anything in those sizes. Kurogiri offered, making Izuku nod. That made perfect sense to him. Okay. Izuku quickly bundled up his clothes and pulled the door open a crack. He offered the cloth ball to the gap and a misty hand retrieved them before leaving. Izuku shut the door right after. Alright, I'll be back soon, young Izuku. The misty man's footsteps faded away with his voice. Izuku sat on the bed, tugging the hoodie lower to try and hide his legs better. He felt so exposed. Izuku sighed and scooched back further onto the bed and tossed a blanket over his legs. That felt a bit better. He just had to wait. Izuku nearly jumped out of his skin as the door suddenly slammed open. Izuku, are we going to do anything or are you going back to bed? Tamura called, completely unaware of the scare he just gave Izuku. Tamura, Kurogiri's getting me clothes. I'm not properly dressed yet. Izuku yelped as Tamura hopped onto the bed next to him. You got breathes and a shirt, right? Tamura asked, seemingly serious. Why yeah. Izuku tugged the blanket up a bit more. Then you're fine. Tamura instantly lit back up. Tamura hadn't the slightest idea about privacy, did he? Izuku felt his ears grow red as the teen scooched closer yet. Izuku wondered what happened to the reserved and seemingly shy Tamura he met before. Maybe this is just what he's like with people he knows? An idea crossed Izuku's mind. Maybe he just wasn't taught boundaries? It certainly felt better than the alternative. That being that Shigaraki never had any other friends. Then Izuku remembered he didn't have any friends. So it wouldn't exactly be a long shot to say Tamura didn't have any either. Great, two socially awkward teenagers, what could go wrong? Izuku snuggled further into the guest bed at Tamura's place. Just yesterday Izuku told his mom about his job in more detail, more specifically that there was a room next door offered to him. He had been elated, proud even. Izuku remembers trying to get her to stop crying was especially hard. What surprised him was that she asked if he would want to move out. It wasn't put cruelly, she even makes sure to elaborate it would just be for the convenience of being close to work. At any point she would welcome him back home. The idea excited him but scared him at the same time. So, he said he would try it for a bit and see how it went. Tamura practical exploded when Izuku told him about the idea. He seemed set on making Izuku stay. He offered to help Izuku pack, unpack, set up everything. Kurogiri actually had to pull the teen back as to not scare off young Izuku. The misty bartender said. So it was set. Izuku brought over his necessities and did his best to settle in. The room was empty of hero merch, however, as Izuku felt it would be strange to have All Might in a building where less than legal things happened. The room was rather bland too, as Izuku only brought needs. Izuku eyed his new room. He was excited, but also uneasy. It was all so new. Honestly, he wondered if he could do this or not. What if his nerves got the best of him? Izuku flinched as he suddenly heard 2 sets of feet stomp up the bar stairs. Kurogiri never stomped. Tamura did, but there was only one of him. Izuku hid under his blankets as he heard Tamura's scratchy voice growl at someone. Someone more important showed up. Hell, I thought you said you wouldn't be caught dead living here. Tamura's voice rasped not too far away now. Another voice, smoother but just as angry, responded. Someone? Gee boss, I thought we were friends. The voice practically dripped with sarcasm, so much so that even Izuku caught on. Suddenly the door to the room burst open. Izuku squeaked and fled as deep into his blanket as he could. The 2 men went silent before a hand suddenly grabbed Izuku by his tail. A pet? I'm less important than Dash. The voice's owner yanked him out of his hiding spot. The man cut himself off as he saw that Izuku's tail was, in fact, attached to a person. Izuku shivered as he stared back at a pair of icy blue eyes. Before he or the stranger could move, Tamura suddenly leapt on the stranger. Let him go, you burnt sack of meat. Tamura growled as he toppled the man over. Izuku yelled as he landed head first on the ground. Beside him, he could hear the stranger and Tamura snapping and kicking at each other. A flick of fire made Izuku panic. Instantly he reached into the pile of limbs and yanked who he thought would be Tamura out of the mess. He kept a hoof on the man left on the floor. Only it was a confused Tamura under his hoof. Izuku blinked and looked at the man he was currently holding like a limp cat. He had the man under the arms. The blue fire across his hands instantly went out. All 3 of them were unsure what to do next. After a moment, though, Izuku watched a devilish smile spread across the stranger's scarred face. Damn crusty, hiding the meat from the rest of us, huh? The stranger looked down at Tamura with a smirk on his face. Tamura turned red and finally pushed off Izuku's hoof. Shut up, Dabi. The teen scrambled to his feet. I'll kill you. Izuku carefully set down the man in his hands. As he did, Izuku noticed something. Dabi and Shigaraki. They were the same height. Izuku looked between the boys as they argued, surprised. Dabi's hair made him look a bit taller, and his shoes helped, but they were at least within an inch of each other. Distantly, Izuku recalled how light Dabi had felt, just like Tamura. He wondered if he could carry them both. Suddenly the boys in front of him stopped arguing. Tamura's face turned an unnatural red while Dabi grinned. I'm happy to let you try, cowboy. Dabi's voice turned playful. What? Like he'd want to carry your burnt Dash? Tamura squawked as Dabi nudged him with an elbow. You sure? And here I'd think your lazy bum would jump at the chance to not walk. Dabi sneered, making Tamura fume. Izuku just laughed, unsure what to do with himself. Maybe he should tell Mom he wanted to stay home after all. Izuku sat at the bar counter watching the new people run around and talk. They had managed to get through introductions rather quickly. Now it seemed it was just time to see who clicked with who. Kurogiri and Compress were chatting quietly at the end of the bar. The 2 seemed to be enjoying a talk about wines. Izuku admired their knowledge on the subject. Honestly, he wondered if he should learn this mixology they were talking about. It sounded almost magical at times. Spinner seemed to be getting along rather well with Tamura. Seeing the teen be friendly with others made Izuku smile a little. Mange and Toga seemed to have adopted twice. The 2 women seemed to enjoy the man's more bubbly side. There was a trio who seemed to be ignoring each other, set on disappearing into the background. Muscular, Mustard, and Moonfish. Izuku couldn't help but connect the fact they all had names starting with With the mask, Izuku couldn't get a good read on Mustard, but he could see the youngling perk up ever so often when Tamura and Spinner mentioned a game. Muscular and Moonfish, however, they seemed off. They seemed to share a sort of hunger, one Izuku was unnerved by. Lastly, there was Dabi, who seemed set on Izuku. He didn't exactly know what the teen was going for. Constant touches and smirks left Izuku confused. Izuku flicked his ear as Dabi invited himself to touch it. Did the guy have no boundaries? Izuku huffed, patting the counter. Kurogiri instantly got the message and sent a drink Izuku's way. Only for Dabi to snag the can of soda as it slid their way. Izuku glared at the hand as it opened the can. Izuku tried to comprehend what Dabi was trying to get across as he took the drink for himself. As Dabi maintained eye contact as he took a sip, a thought hit Izuku. Was this idiot challenging him? Izuku felt a flicker of something in the back of his mind. It sounded like the goddess humming. Seemed she agreed. Izuku huffed and narrowed his eyes at Dabi. It didn't matter if the man was flashy or smug, Izuku was the one in charge. Tamura has part of Izuku's herd, not his. The goddess in his head flared in agreement. Dabi was trying to rob Izuku of Tamura. Of his herd. Izuku ground his teeth and twitched in his chair. The goddess encouraged him, telling him to chase off the bull trying to take his herd. To say it was over in a second would be an understatement. 1 second Tamura was talking to Spinner about a mod he had downloaded, the next everyone was scrambling agent the nearest wall as a massive white bull roared at them. Tamura blinked owlishly at the bull before he recognized the green tuft of hair in between its horns. Tamura also recognized the sorry BSTRD between its hooves. What the hell did Dabi do to get that strong of a response? Izuku mooed and huffed at the man, his head whipping around as if challenging Dabi to get up. The massive bell hanging around his neck rang as he bellowed. Tamura was unsure it was even safe to step in or not. After a moment Dabi did stand, but he kept his head low and limped toward the back of the bar. Izuku followed him huffing the entire way. After the man left the room Izuku seemed satisfied but didn't turn back. Instead the bull, who was easily the size of a car, laid in front of Tamura's chair. Spinner looked at him desperate for an explanation, but Tamura hadn't the slightest clue what to say. Izuku was beginning to think Dabi had a poor sense of humor. The man even once invited himself onto Izuku's lap. Of course, Izuku swiftly dumped him off. Dabi was strange. The constantly tailed Izuku, sometimes actually touching his tail. The man also seemed set on blowing at Izuku's ear, smirking when they flicked at the assault. It was growing tiresome. Izuku didn't even bother chasing him off anymore. Izuku huffed as he, Toga, Shigaraki, and of course, Dabi walked around. It was going to be a simple trip to the shops for food. But the trip ended up as more of a tour of the new mall. Izuku didn't know how to feel about the massive influx of people in town. Sure, it was probably great for the economy, but Izuku wasn't a fan of the piles of trash visitors left. At every corner, there was a garbage can, yet trash lay around everywhere. It was a total mess, one that bothered Izuku. The feeling of stepping on garbage was bad enough for someone wearing shoes, but with Izuku's hooves? Izuku shook a plastic wrapper of his foot with a growl. It always got stuck between the claws of his hooves. Cows were eve-toed ungulates, which meant they had 2 clawed toes they walked on. Perfect of dirt and mud, not so much for trash-covered streets. Almost every step left him flicking out trash from his hooves. Needless to say, he hated it. Why don't you just wear shoes then? Dabi's voice made Izuku's ears twitch. Can't. They're bad for my hooves. Izuku would have felt bad giving such a short-tempered answer to anyone other than Dabi. But, well, it was Dabi. The man kinda deserved it for all the times he poked at Izuku. Why? Dabi's voice returned. Izuku blinked confused. Was that not enough of an answer? It was simple to understand surely. Have you ever seen a normal cow wear shoes? Izuku hoped the idiot would realize how dumb the question was. Instead, Dabi shrugged. Never met a cow in real life. Izuku was tired of Dabi's sass. That's not what I'm going for all I know cows might, horses do, right? Dabi explained himself further despite no prompting. They do, but cows don't. They just don't have the right kind of foot for it, I guess. Izuku looked at Dabi, considering if the man was being serious. Obviously being sly went over your head, but I'm adaptable. Dabi smiled at him. You're strange. Izuku mumbled. Aren't you? Dabi retorted. Guys. Halloween stuff. Toga's voice squealed suddenly. Looking to the source, Izuku watched Toga drag a reluctant Tamura into a gaudy store. Wall to wall was covered in rubbery masks and fragile fabrics. Toga instantly gravitated to a pen, one shaped like a syringe. Izuku paused at the store's door. Mom would kill him for going into a store like this. Izuku watched as Tamura slipped further into the store. Well, she didn't need to know, right? It's not like he was going to buy anything anyways. Izuku ignored the clatter of his hooves on the surprisingly clean store. What do you know, the dirty people Mom warned him about cared about cleanliness. Emo, goth, people fitting what words his mother called them by walked all around the store. Yet, not one gave him a strange look. They smiled openly at him. Some with mutant quirks even hopping in place in excitement at the sight of him. Izuku blushed as a girl with bunny features ran over to greet him. She was bubbly despite her looks. Her appearance looked vampiric, the clothes, the piercings. Yet she was so friendly. Izuku wondered what Mom thought was so dangerous about these people. They were so welcoming. The girl wasn't even an employee trying to pressure him to buy. She had run off with some of her friends to another store after saying hello. Izuku looked out the store, seeing the stalls where women with perfume and phones tried to wrap people into deals. Mom would love them. What a skewed version of the world his mother saw. Izuku turned back to the store. He definitely preferred this place. Izuku trotted further in, looking for Tamura. Soon he found the boy. He was occupied by Toga in a corner. The poor teen was red in the face as Toga crept toward him with something. Dabi was browsing a shelf nearby, blocking the poor teen in. Izuku ran to meet his friends. Dabi noticed him immediately. "Oh, bunny girl, get done with you?" Dabi huffed. "Yes, she had to go." Izuku huffed back. "How rude." Though he guessed even he didn't know the girl's name, so, still. "Would you just call me cowboy?" Izuku challenged before remembering he did just that before. "Yeah." Toga spoke up. "It would be confusing." The girl suddenly pushed Tamura toward Dabi and Izuku. "We have to cowman after all." Her face was split in a devious grin. Tamura was bright red, offsetting his white hair and... Izuku blushed a little himself, noticing the fake cow ears and horns on Tamura's head. The teen ripped off said ears off in split second. "What was that?" "I told you it would be offensive to do that to Izuku." Tamura screeched, but Toga only giggled. "Come on, Shiggy." She ignored his screech to not call him that. "Don't you want to match with Izuku?" "That's not what I meant by matching costumes, and you know it." Tamura squealed. "You want to match with me?" Izuku swore, his heart squeezed. Tamura avoided his gaze for only a second before nodding at him, his face as red as his eyes. Izuku smiled widely. "I'd love that." Izuku felt his tail begin to flick. Izuku ran closer to Tamura, grabbing his hands. "What do you want to be?" "We could be monsters, some kind of vampire for you maybe." "Oh, you'd make a great angel too." Izuku held Tamura's hands tight. He smiled as Tamura squeezed his hands back. "An angel? I think you got the wrong idea about me." A smile wobbled onto Tamura's face. Izuku shook his head. "Nonsense plus." Izuku grinned and pointed to his horns. "I'm already quite devilish, aren't I?" That made Tamura laugh. The poor teen nearly toppled over. Izuku shifted in his bed. Kicking off his sheets, he sat up, surprised by how dark it was. A glance at the window proved it was raining outside, quite heavily too. The clock he had brought over showed it was in fact morning. Izuku stared out the window. It was nearly pitch black out there. He hoped the storm wouldn't get too bad. Izuku felt the familiar wash of the goddess flood over him. Hather's voice filtered quietly into the quiet room. "You remind me of him, my bull." Her voice was barely a whisper. The heavy rain outside almost hushed her. Izuku considered the words for a moment. "You were married?" The goddess laughed. Relations between gods often don't fit the image of a modern marriage. It was more of a partnership at times. Her laughter was a welcome warmth in the cold weather. "Who was he?" Izuku laid back on his bed to listen. "Monto, a god of war. He took many faces, man, bull, falcon. All forms powerful. Falcons symbolized the sky. The bull's strength and war. The people of Thebes worshipped him most. Hather's voice was laced with wonder. Izuku hummed, prompting her further. A black snout and white body was a sign of him. Bulls fitting that description were his favorite form to take, to incarnate as. Such a form, specific to Manta himself, was called butchies. But my nose is pink, right? Izuku's question made the goddess laugh. Yes, but it will not stay that way. Soon your snout and hooves will darken into an ashy black. The color of soot. It will look appealing against the ashy white of your coat. Hather explained. Izuku couldn't help but recall his herd. Dabi and Tamura, soot and ash. It's no mistake I see them as my herd, is it? If you are asking if I changed fate to make it so, then no. It seemed fate itself as decided those two for you. Besides, that golden-eyed man, he doesn't fit in that, does he? Izuku nodded. That was good, he wasn't tied back in some mystical way from making his herd. He was free to select who he wished. Izuku wished for the three of them. Hather? Yes, my child. How am I supposed to make them a part of my herd for real? Izuku waited for a long moment. But an answer never came. She must have been too weak to keep talking. Izuku slipped out the bar and into the pawnshop. Jiren still had the shop closed. He hoped nothing bad had happened. Izuku was about to close the door between the shop and the bar when he saw a familiar face. Chisaki was at the door, his back to the front window. Oh, he probably thought they were late on opening. Izuku clattered over to the front door, carefully unlocking and opening it. Sorry, Izuku got the man's attention. Jiren is still keeping the shop closed. Chisaki nodded. It seems so, but in all honesty I'm not here to shop. Chisaki's smooth voice made the heavy rain sound far away. The man was under an umbrella despite the protective overhang of the store's roof. I hope to see you again, I was worried. Worried? Izuku blinked owlishly at the comment. What would make Overhaul worry about him? I heard of Shigaraki's little standoff with the hero killer. I was worried you got hurt too. Chisaki stepped a little closer, gold eyes quickly scanning Izuku. Hero killer? The guy who hurt Dash. Izuku laughed, feeling a little dumb. Tamura never told me who it was, sadly I only arrived after. Sadly? Overhaul scoffed. You don't need to be stuck in that man's foolish games. Overhaul's face grew stern but Izuku brushed it off. Tamura is my herd, I should have been there to keep him safe. Izuku huffed up at Kai. Herd. Overhaul's demeanor changed. Instantly he was tilting his head to the side like a curious cat. That was kind of a strange thing to say, wasn't it? Why yeah, it's like friends but Dash. Izuku didn't know what to say. How do you describe a cattle herd in the eyes of human social behavior? Chisaki finished for him. Izuku sputtered and choked on air. It's more than that. It's real relationships. In-depth ones. A bull would happily die defending his cows. Izuku found himself waving his arms about in panic. Yeah, that kind of fit, but it was different. Izuku wanted more than SSC. He wanted to keep Tamura happy and healthy. Besides, Izuku started. Me and Tamura, we're just friends right now. Not every herd has to be a breeding one. Sure, it is more often than not, but I'm not a wild animal. But you want a breeding herd, don't you? Chisaki's voice betrayed any emotion. His eyes stared blankly down at Izuku. I would like it, but I don't want to lose Tamura's friendship. Izuku looked down at the flooding ground. And is hiding your feeling going to help anyone? Even you? No. I suggest you tell someone if you have an interest in them. You will never have a meaningful relationship if you just walk on eggshells for the rest of your life. Izuku nodded. As strangely forward as Overhaul was, the man had a point. If he faked it the rest of his life, would he actually ever really be just friends with Tamura? Or would he just be a fool left hoping for something that would never come? Thank you, Chisaki. Izuku looked back up at the man with a small smile. An honest one at that. I needed someone to knock some sense into me. Overhaul nodded a little and Izuku could tell the man smiled back at him. You want to come into the bar? I doubt this is going to let up anytime soon. Izuku said, flicking his head at the downpour. Overhaul hummed. Fair point, besides, I've grown tired of standing. Izuku smiled and opened the door further to allow the man in. Izuku quickly found a stand for overhaul to place his wet umbrella as he tapped it off on the door. After locking back up and shutting the blinds, Izuku happily walked overhaul to the bar door. Playing host Izuku opened this door for him too, earning another smile from overhaul. The bar wasn't as full as it was normally, but a few patrons lounged about. With an encouraging wave, Izuku led overhaul upstairs. With some of the league moving in, Tamura had a wall taken down to make room for a rest area. TV, couches and chairs, even a few beanbags littered the new room. This room just got installed, so it's a bit bare, Izuku explained. Overhaul nodded, seemingly pleased with the room. Izuku had to work hard to keep it clean. It was nice to have someone appreciate it. Izuku encouraged the man to sit as he ran off downstairs to get snacks and a drink. Despite Tamura's growling to Kurogiri, no mini-fridge had been moved upstairs as of yet. Izuku hopped onto a bar, stood quickly grabbing the misty man's attention. Can I get a taste plater for upstairs? I brought a friend and I don't really know what he likes yet. Izuku moved to get his wallet but stopped with Kurogiri told him to. No need, I'm more than happy to give you and your friend some food. Are they the man I saw before? If so, do you think they would like something a bit stronger than soda? Kurogiri asked. Izuku pondered for a moment. Maybe? Like I said, I don't really know. He does seem like a wine guy, those fancy. Izuku was shocked when Kurogiri seemed to know exactly what to get. He was definitely a bartender for a reason. In seconds, Izuku had a tray of snacks. Izuku sputtered as Kurogiri handed him an entire bottle of wine. Please, Izuku, no one this side of town even orders it. I'd be happy to see someone dash. Kurogiri glared at a particularly beer-covered patron. With good taste could enjoy it. If you say so. Izuku slipped off the stool and back upstairs. Sorry for the wait, I was unsure what you'd want to drink dash. Izuku froze at the top of the steps. He had walked into a strange scene. Poor Overhaul was at the edge of his seat leaning away from Dobby. The scarred man seemed intent on getting into Overhaul's bubble. Izuku let out a rough into the room. Dobby and Overhaul looked at him, the latter a little more desperately. Dobby, good to see you're up. Izuku walked over to the table and set the heavy tray down on it. Morning, cowboy, who's squawky? Dobby leaned onto the table, instantly snagging a snack for himself. Squawky? All I asked is if you'd showered in a while. Overhaul well squawked. Izuku sighed. This is Overhaul, my friend. Izuku moved to sit between the two, hoping to distance Dobby from Overhaul. Popping the cork off the bottle, he poured Overhaul some of the drink. Before he could set it down, Dobby took it from him. A far cry from the nice glasses Kurogiri had given Isuku to use, Dobby poured a fat serving of his own into what looked like an old Gatorade bottle. Specifically one of the ones with a squeeze lid. One which Dobby promptly utilized. Izuku was going to kill this man. Dobby chuckled. Come on. It's easier this way. The man tossed an arm over Izuku's shoulders, making Chiskai flinch. Besides, I'm way more fun drunk. Dobby winked at him. Dobby got a horn up his rear that day. Just not the one he was hoping for. Shigaraki was going to kill Toga. He had told the girl of the idea he had gotten for a costume. A simple fox spirit. Easy, simple but fun. At least it was supposed to be fun. Despite whatever he tried, he couldn't manage to make a passing foxtail. He tried a weird yarn trick, it turned out thick and gnarly. He had even dared to dip into furry territory to see how they made tails. He didn't have the cash to make anything like they did though. That's when Toga had slept in. She happily offered him a long fluffy tail. He should have known to not trust it when he didn't tell him where she got it. Now he was here. Tamura was sat on his bedroom floor glaring at his full-length mirror. He looked just like he planned, with pointy ears, long fluffy tail, even sharp black claws. The problem? He hadn't put on anything but the tail. As Tamura glared at his reflection, the fur on the tail bristled. It was fused to his back at the bottom of his spine. Tamura swore something like this happened in a Goosebumps book. Sighing, Tamura leaned against his bed. What was he going to do? Sure, everyone else was getting dressed up, so he wasn't exactly going to stand out that bad. But what about after Halloween? It's not like the tail would magically drop off in the morning. He wondered if he'd have to hack off the new extremities. Before he could consider what blade would be best for the job, he heard a small knock at his door. Izuku's timid voice called from the other side. "Are you alright? Did you get stuck somehow?" Izuku seemed honest as ever. "No, wait, why would you even ask that?" Tamura stared confused at his closed door. He could see the shadow of Izuku's hooves behind it. "Oh, Dabi managed to get stuck in a tube dress. It kinda made me worry you got stuck somehow too." "Stupid, I know," Izuku's voice answered. The image of Dabi flailing on the ground stuck in a piece of cloth made Shigaraki laugh. "No," Shigaraki looked back at himself. How would he explain this? "Izuku." He heard the boy shift on his feet. "Why yeah? Do you know anything about curses?" "I think I might have been." Shigaraki didn't want to even finish the sentence. Izuku would think he was an idiot. "Cursed." Izuku elaborated for him. Izuku hummed. "A little like, can I come in? If I know what it is, I might be able to help." Shigaraki blinked. He hadn't expected a yes. Scrambling off his floor, he ran to the door and swung it open. He didn't leave the door open long enough for anyone else to see. He simply cracked open the door and yanked Izuku inside. Izuku understandably yelped, a bell around his neck clattering. Tamura nearly shoved the poor bull onto his bed. After a moment to get his balance, Izuku looked him over. Shigaraki could feel his fur fluff and ears twitch. The sensation was weird and new. He didn't know how Izuku could tolerate it. Tamura blinked, staring at the bull and fidgeting in place. To his credit, Izuku seemed to be actually investigating him. He could hear Izuku mumbling about his new features. "Do you have an idea of what might have done this? Perhaps you angered a spirit?" Izuku looked him in the eyes. The seriousness in them made Shigaraki blush a little. "Toga gave me a tail, all I did was try and tie it to my shirt and dash." Shigaraki motioned to the fluffy tail he now had. "It kinda just jumped on my back and grabbed on. I tried to pull it off, dust it even, but it just dash." Shigaraki growled in frustration. He plopped back onto his bedroom floor in defeat. "Toga, huh? I did see her lurking by the door to the shop. She must have gotten it there." Izuku scratched at his ears in thought. Jiren sometimes gets questionable goods. It wouldn't be strange for something from there to be cursed. Izuku slid off the bed with a careful look. He held out his hands. "May I?" It took a moment for Shigaraki to realize what he was asking for, and blushed when he did. However, he obliged. Tamura offered Izuku his new tail. Izuku took it gently into his hands, before closing his eyes and mumbling something. Shigaraki had a feeling it wasn't to him. Tamura yelped as a hot bolt rushed up his spine. The hot feeling settled into his skull, making it hard for him to think. Despite himself, he gripped onto Izuku for support. The bull allowed it, simply unfazed. Just as Tamura managed to find words again, Izuku let go and the feeling disappeared. It belonged to a kitsune. A hunter chopped off one of its tails. Izuku began to slide the tail. Shigaraki wondered if he was being comforted or the kitsune was. "I explained the situation the best I could to him. He's a bit distrusting of humans, but he'll work with you. He wants the tail back but doesn't need it." Izuku explained. "It's more of the principle. He's already on his way here. Once he is, he'll just grab it and go." "Why did it grab me? If he wanted, why did he make it do?" Shigaraki motioned to himself. "All this?" Izuku smiled and nodded. "Well, a tail can't exactly know where it is, so it just grabbed on so it could try and find its bearings. It's how he knows where to find it now." "Right, how did you talk to him?" Shigaraki corrected himself. "It was a kitsune, not a random tail." Izuku laughed. "A kitsune tail holds power, therefore it holds a part of the original kitsune's mind. It's kinda separate now, it's been separated. So it's not that I talked to the kitsune that owned it, I talked to him." Izuku pet the tail purposefully. "Oh, so it is just a tail, but a smart tail?" Shigaraki blushed at the laughter Izuku broke into. "That's one way to put it." Shigaraki didn't know what to do with himself as he entered the bar. However, Izuku instantly fixed that, trotting over to him with a bell ringing around his neck. They had decided on something simple, a matching part of a costume. Shigaraki held still as Izuku tied a thread around his neck, one a small bell hanging off of. They chose to both wear a bell. It was a tiny connection, but one that still made Tamura blush. Tamura went to sit down in the bar and hide his red face. Spinner's snickering told him he had failed. They wouldn't be trick-or-treating, no, instead they would be handing out. Despite the shoddiness of the area, a lot of low-income houses are around. Of course, anyone with a kid could tell you that even one child raises your monthly spending. So, it was an attractive area for families who needed housing. The street the bar was on had been lit up with lights by the residents. It looked more like a Halloween town than a line of bars and stores. People had even taken the time to block off alleyways, just in case. Someone had even rented a street sweeper. Every few hours or so it could be heard rumbling past. It made Shigaraki happy. He himself had grown up on this street, and Halloween was a bit of an event around here. Lots of people deemed scary by the public also lived in the area. But thanks to the season, they happily sat on their front steps handing out treats to younger folks. It was nice. In all honesty, Shigaraki never knew why this part of town was labeled shady. Izuku eyed the front steps of the people across the road from them. The man owned an apartment complex, and he had easily a 20-pound bag of candy sitting on the steps next to him. The only scary thing about him was his looks. Tamura had actually trick-or-treated at his place before. The man was jolly enough to be a Santa in his opinion. But the man had a large maw of sharp teeth and even sharper claws on his hands. Tamura watched as the man held open the bag, happily laughing as a girl dressed as a witch grabbed a handful of candy. Some shady part of town. Shigaraki flinched back into reality as a kid peeking into the bar's front door. Tamura smiled watching Izuku trot over to the little girl, offering a bowl of candy to her. She giggled as Izuku patted her on the head. Just then who he assumed was her father stepped closer, bowing to Izuku. Tamura sat up as Izuku chatted with the man. He tried to strain his new ears to hear them, but the street sweeper began rumbling past. Its brushes and loud vacuum drowned out the sound of the strange man's chat with Izuku. Tamura watched as a heavy blush formed on Izuku's face and ears. His tail even began to arch in a weird cow tail wag. The little girl eagerly pointed out a horn on her head. Was that real or the costume? Izuku smiled at her, allowing the girl to boop the end of one of his horns. Izuku had to know the man. Tamura looked at him, trying to remember him. It was hard to tell what was real and what was fake. The gold of his eyes had to be fake. The weird brown but weirdly shining pink hair also had to be false. He tried to focus, but soon the man was leaving, waving goodbye to Izuku as his kids started running off to the next house. Shigaraki wanted to know who that guy was, and more importantly what he had said to make Izuku blush so badly. Izuku woke up in a field. Again. Knowing what to expect this time, he easily stood up on his four hooves. The grass and trees were a little grayer than last time, but Izuku recognized Hather's mind easily. Many of the wild shrubs hung heavy with berries, and trees sagged with fruit. On a distant hill, Izuku could see a farm of some kind of CRP. It was harvest season. Putting his nose to the air, Izuku took in a big sniff. Not too far away he could smell the herd. However, there was something else. Izuku felt the thin fur he did have stand on end. Something smelled of a predator. Izuku bellowed into the air, warning the herd before he trotted after the smell. Was this perhaps an equivalent of a nightmare for the goddess? If it was, Izuku was going to be sure to fight off whatever imaginary horror facing her. Izuku stopped in his tracks. Sitting on the rim of an old well was a fox with 8 tails. It sat patiently as if waiting for him. Its silver fur shone in the dim light of the overcast sky. A little calmer now, Izuku walked over to the well. "You're the kitsune, aren't you?" Izuku called out. The fox nodded. "Ah, so that's what was going on. Tamura is happy to give you your tail back, by the way, so don't worry about fighting him for it." Izuku was cut off by the kitsune's laughter. As if a human would be a challenge. Weak, fragile things you all are. The grin that split open the kitsune's face made Izuku remember it was a predator. Sure, it was the size of a fox, but it held power. "I don't have a reason to fight you, and neither does Tamura." Izuku huffed, stomping a hoof. The kitsune rolled his eyes but seemed to get the message. Fine, you're no fun, it purred jumping off the well. I'm fun, I just care about my herd. Izuku snuffed. Oh, but of course, do something for me will you? The kitsune stopped at Izuku's hooves. That depends on what it is. Izuku narrowed his eyes at the fox spirit. Smart cow, it chirped before leaping onto his back. Izuku held back the urge to buck it off as he felt it sit. Your little friend, the white one dash. Tamura, Izuku corrected, trying to crane his neck around to look at the fox. Yeah, the kitsune brushed him off. I ask that you refrain from touching him until I take my tail back. I'd rather not, you too dirty it. Izuku was sure his naturally pink ears turned red. Oh, okay, I can do that. Izuku had honestly expected the fox to ask him to do something horrible. That was a reasonable request. And who are you to tell my calf what not to do? Hather's voice chimed in. Izuku turned around, seeing her approach. My calf can do what he wants, including that little white-haired teen. Izuku heard the kitsune growl from his back. Hather. It's okay. I don't mind really. Me and Tamura aren't even like that. Izuku stepped back, more to save the kitsune than Hather. He doubted even a kitsune could stand against the power of a god. The godly cow huffed but relented. So be it, just don't let that bramble make you bleed. What a weird saying, Izuku nodded. It's all right really. Izuku felt shy suddenly. Besides, Kai invited me out for dinner last night at Trick or Treat. Izuku flicked his ears like that would make him less embarrassed. I'll be at his place for the night, so depending on your timing, Izuku looked at the kitsune perched on his back. I might not even be in the same building as Tamura, much less doing that with him. The kitsune seemed satisfied. You're not that bad, most would try and wager to keep my tail, yet you encourage me to take it. Izuku glanced at a stump next to the kitsune's other tails. It belongs to you. And it's not like you gave it away either, it was taken. You deserve it back. Izuku said, and Hather nodded. Truly, I can't imagine what it feels like. As a cow, I at least know my body would go on to feed hungry mouths if I was culled. But no man eats foxtail to my knowledge. It's not even being used. A waste. Hather's words were morbid, but he agreed. Cattle were killed and chopped up every day, but it was for food. Most places even use their horns and skin for other products. Their skin could warm a cold family, their bones crushed to feed CRPs. There was a bit of honor in that, making another life better even after your own death. But the cutting of a tail? That was a trophy. There was no good reason. As appealing as the tail was, it wasn't long enough for even a scarf. Izuku found himself hoping that the man who did that to the kitsune was paying for his sins. Dabi had had enough. Clearly, Izuku was far too dense to get his hints. If he wanted to get his point across, he was going to have to do something else. The only problem was Dabi had no idea what to do. He'd never run into this problem before. And as much as he hated to admit it, he was too embarrassed to say his wants outright. Dabi groaned pitifully and leaned on the bar counter. He saw Tamura's ears flick as he did. Huffing, Dabi tried to scan over the brat. Izuku constantly blushed around Tamura. It was like the taller teen was some idol Izuku prayed to. What was so great about Tamura anyway? He was a snob, a bit of a nerd, and honestly thinner than uncooked spaghetti. Dabi played with the rim of a glass he had been drinking from in thought. Maybe it was the hair? Dabi pondered, letting the soot in his hair run out. His hair was naturally white after all, he just dyed it. Was hair dye cheap? Yeah. Did Dabi use soot instead? Yeah. Dabi blinked. Sitting up, Dabi unashamed sniffed at himself. He smelled horrible. Not weird, would smell like spinner ether, like wet beef bad. Dabi glanced over at Shigaraki's pure white hair. Sure, it was scraggly and pointed out at odd angles, but it was clean. Did Izuku just think he smelled? Izuku blushed as he slipped into Chisaki's apartment. The man had a home, one Eri lived at. The apartment was a place for Chisaki and Chisaki only. I love my daughter dearly, but even I need rest from her. Chisaki had explained. It made sense, it was the same reason Chisaki had offered Izuku a job babysitting the girl. Chisaki was constantly working or taking care of Eri, except for small breaks. The apartment was the place for those breaks. Izuku felt honored Chisaki was inviting him into such a place. Chisaki's safe place. The place was spotless. Each surface was shiny, with elegant but relaxed colors. The couch sitting in front of a TV looked plump and soft. Izuku caught sight of the dinner table next. No food sat on it, yet it still looked pretty on its own. Fine china and dainty silverware decorated a white table cover with lacy edges. Izuku trotted over to the table, doing his best to keep his tail from wagging in excitement. He didn't want to break any of the many happy pictures of Chisaki and Eri. "Your place is so cool, Kai," Izuku chirped as he slipped onto a chair at the table. Izuku heard Chisaki chuckle from the kitchen, where the man was cooking for the two of them. "Thank you, I'm glad it's to your liking." Chisaki's voice turned into a purr. "Perhaps you'd enjoy a tour after dinner?" Izuku watched Chisaki appear from around the kitchen wall with 2 plats, wine glasses laced in his fingers, and a wine bottle under his arm. Kai's smile was sweet and playful. "Maybe even you would like to see the bedroom?" Kai walked over to the table, placing a plate in front of Izuku. Despite the clear flirting, Izuku was clueless. "Sure. I'd love to see more of your home away from home." Chisaki just shook his head with a smile. Izuku noticed how the black clothes Kai were wearing had shiny gold trim. It made Kai sparkle and shine as he walked around in the warmly lit room. Chisaki brought attention to the food. Curried cauliflower quinoa. Izuku had no idea what any of that fancy stuff was, but he was drooling. Chisaki continued. Spicy arugula, warm quinoa, shredded red cabbage, of course, the curried cauliflower, cilantro, thin-sliced cucumber, and lastly golden raisins. Chisaki seemed proud of the meal, and Izuku couldn't blame him. Not only did it look good, it smelled amazing. Izuku barely contained himself from pouncing on the meal. He was a guest, and the guest had to practice good table manners. Izuku smiled eagerly up at Chisaki as he set the wine glasses on the table. Chisaki poured them each a glass before he finally sat. Chisaki was across from him, and Izuku noticed his lashes looked fuller than normal. Come to think of it, it looked like Chisaki had a bit of makeup on. Izuku blushed at the idea it was for him, but quickly explained it away with the thought Chisaki had just come from work. Chisaki probably just had an important meeting. Izuku wiggled in delight as Chisaki moved to start eating. The moment he began, Izuku jumped on his plate. It was so good. Izuku groaned as he chewed on the meal. Everything melted together into a delectable mess of spice, sweetness, and creaminess. Chisaki was amazing. Izuku broke out of his trance as he heard Kai laugh. The man was coving his mouth with one hand, but his eyes were closed in a bright smile. Izuku blushed. He must have spoken out loud. "I'm glad you like it," Chisaki chirped. Izuku felt his face heat up as Chisaki pulled his hand away from his face. Kai had the prettiest smile he'd ever seen. He was sure Kai came from whatever heaven Shigaraki had. No way the men were, "Well, I do, it's perfect." Izuku cooed, moving in for another bite. Some of the shredded cabbage hung out of his mouth as he chewed. Luckily Chisaki laughed, not taking his gross face as an insult. "The wine goes great with it, you should try it." Chisaki's silky voice called. Izuku nodded eagerly, grabbing his glass. He was miles less fancy than Kai with how he just snagged the glass and shoved it to his lips. Izuku took a large slug before putting the glass down. Izuku gulped, then beamed at Kai. "It does." Chisaki laughed. Izuku liked his lips as he collected his and Kai's dirty plates. Quickly washing the cutlery, Izuku left it in the drying rack. Leaving the kitchen, Izuku was surprised to see Kai was no longer at the table. Instead, he turned to see Kai, leaning inside a doorway. Kai had a playful smirk, hiding behind the door as Izuku moved toward him. A little confused, Izuku approached the door. Peeking around it, he saw Kai was gone. Instead, he was further down a hall, peeking around another door at the end. Izuku suddenly realized the game Chisaki was playing. Izuku could have sworn he heard Kai giggle as he rushed to the door, tail flicking wildly behind him. NSFW. Izuku purred as he entered the room at the end of the hall. The room was dimly lit, and rosy red sheets covering a large bed welcomed his view. He, however, was a little more focused on what or who was on the bed. Kai was laid on his back toward the headboard, his black clothes forgotten on the floor. Izuku groaned and rushed to join Kai in being endy. Tossing his clothes God knows where, Izuku leapt onto the bed liking his lips. Dinner had been tasty, but Kai looked divine. The dim light made Kai's golden eyes glow like fire. So close Izuku saw a stunning sight. Kai's shoulders and upper arms were coated in tattoos. Flowing water, flowers, it reminded Izuku of the peaceful river valley Hathor visited him in. Izuku found his hand on the landscape printed on Kai's skin. He thumbed over water. The press into Kai's soft flesh made the water look alive with motion. Izuku jumped as suddenly Kai's hands found his chest. Sure, Izuku was shorter than Kai, but he was more built. Bull genetics left Izuku's body sculpted. Izuku enjoyed the hungry look in Kai's eyes. Izuku groaned as Kai's thin fingers found themselves lower and lower. Izuku copied Kai's movements. Soon they both were tugging on each other's PPS. Izuku was a little confused at how limp Kai's tugs were, but he ignored it. It was a new but welcome feeling, someone's hands on his body, much less his pages. Izuku couldn't resist but buck into Kai's hand as he gave him an extra hard tug. It seemed Kai preferred a bit more speedy pace. Izuku easily relented, happy to please his first partner. Before he even got his hand all the way to Kai's hole, the man passed him a bottle of lube. Izuku was ready to use his own slobber, but he didn't mind this. Izuku noted how cold the lube was as he poured it over his hand. That wouldn't do. Izuku glanced at Kai's now forgotten pages. Seemed good enough of a lube warmer to him. Kai gasped as he wrapped his lubed hand around his member. The thick lube tried to escape the through-egg gaps of Izuku's fingers, but he used his other hand to gather it back up. Izuku had two hands on Kai, one on his PP and the other playing with the flesh of his thighs. It seemed enough to make Kai begin to breathe a little harder. Izuku pumped his hand over Kai, enjoying the little whimpers that started to escape his lips. Izuku looked away from the PP in his hands to Kai's face. The man was a mess. His lips red from him biting back, eyes watering as Izuku squeezed him hard. Each breath was airy and fast like he couldn't catch his breath. Easy, easy, Izuku cooed as he slowed down a little. It's all right. Kai's gold eyes snapped to his, and the he let out was delicious. When was the last time Kai had pleased himself? It was like he'd never. Izuku paused his stroking for a moment, surprised. Have you ever? Izuku stared at Kai's face as it turned an impossible red. Kai was chewing on his own fingers, holding back squeaks as Izuku played with him. Izuku considered the new information for a moment. As much as he wanted to just mount Kai and go crazy, that's not exactly what the man could take. I'm just going to finger you, okay? Kai narrowed his eyes in an adorable teary glare. We can do more later, all right? I just need to warm you up to this kind of thing. Your first time shouldn't be painful. Kai pulled his hand from his mouth, drool trailing it. But I want it, just stretch me out dash. Izuku's face seemed to express his concern. Kai breathed for a while before looking at Izuku's pages. Kai's face twisted into something Izuku wasn't able to read before he looked back to Izuku's face. I don't want to disappoint. Izuku instantly shook his head at the idea. Nonsense. I'm perfectly happy with just fingering you a bit. I'm not exactly small, so I don't want to risk hurting you your first time. Kai let out a relaxed sigh, flopping his head down on the bed. Only if you're okay with it. Izuku nodded, taking his hand from Kai's PP, satisfied the lube was warm enough now. Just as he thought when he pressed at Kai's hole, it didn't budge at all. Izuku laid his other hand on Kai's stomach, rubbing slow circles and cooing over Kai. Izuku smiled as Kai took hold of the hand on his belly, holding it tight. All right, grip my hand, not your body, Izuku instructed. It was obvious Kai was going to hold tight onto something. Might as well be his hand. Kai nodded and the change was almost instant. Slowly Izuku managed to fit a single finger into Kai. Yeah, there was no way they were getting to Izuku's PP tonight. Izuku praised Kai for how well he was doing, squeezing his hand back. Whoever inflicted such weird expectations about AC and Deepening on Kai was going to get a mouthful from Izuku. Izuku curled his finger against Kai's wall, gently petting at his walls. It worked as intended, making Kai whimper. Izuku led his and Kai's hands to the man's pages. He encouraged Kai to touch himself a little. The more relaxed Kai was, the better this would go. After a little more movement, he was able to fit a second finger inside Kai. Chisaki whined as Izuku massaged his insides. He loosely tugged at himself, painfully inexperienced. Izuku took Kai's pee-pee into his own hand, enjoying the squeak that escaped Kai. Izuku prodded at Kai's walls and pulled at his pee-pee at a slow pace, but even that had Kai whimpering and miming all over again. Izuku watched fascinated as Kai couldn't sit still. A particular jab at his insides had Kai arch on the bed. Izuku instantly chased the small spot. Kai ummed, sitting up from the bed and grabbing onto Izuku's arm. Izuku chuckled as he pressed his free thumb just below Kai's sack, pressing and massaging the spot as he started on a third finger. Izuku pressed kisses to Kai's face as the man breathed over his shoulder, blurry gold eyes watching Izuku work. Izuku squeezed Kai hard, paired with a three-finger press onto that bump inside Kai. Izuku wished he could taste the that escaped Kai. It was like Izuku had jabbed him in the heart. Izuku grinned and moved back to stroking and petting, only to squeeze and press again. The change from pure pleasure to soft petting seemed more than enough for Kai. Before Izuku knew it, Kai suddenly clung to his arm hard, hiding his face in his neck. Izuku felt the way Kai shook inside and out. A pitiful spurt of white landed on Izuku's hand. Izuku was waiting for more when Kai suddenly went limp, falling onto the bed like a rag doll. Izuku smiled happily to see Kai so spent. Sure, it seemed lackluster to him, but Kai seemed to have the ride of his life. Kai breathed as if Izuku had been giving him hard all night. Izuku watched as Kai faded into sleep. Realizing he was still hard, Izuku looked over at a clock in the room. That was 15 minutes at most. Izuku shrugged and laid back next to Kai. He tugged Kai to his side, managing to tug his head in the crook of his arm. Izuku smiled, perfectly happy with pleasing a member of his herd. Izuku stretched awake with an inhale. He groaned, rubbing his eyes as he sat up. Izuku glanced at the sleeping Kai at his side. He wondered who made him believe so wholeheartedly the entire version nonsense. If it had been some other fool who didn't know how to hold back, Kai could have gotten hurt. Izuku slipped out of bed and scavenged the floor for his clothes. He had dressed just to visit Kai, so the clothes were only on for their meal at most. Plenty clean to wear for the rest of the day. After getting dressed, Izuku moved to the home's kitchen. He scavenged the fridge before starting to cook breakfast for himself and Kai. It's the least he could do, plus Izuku was eager to show how good of a bull he was. Izuku really was hoping Kai would be the first member of his herd, whether that meant they kept seeing each other as friends or more. Izuku didn't mind. He enjoyed being around Kai. The man was just so stunning, yet smart. Izuku couldn't get enough. As he watched the eggs, Izuku fumbled his phone out of his pocket and checked up on Shigaraki. He wanted to make sure the kitsune hadn't shown up and make a fuss. Izuku froze as Shigaraki sent an image back, one of his own face looking far more fox-like. Looking at the picture more, Izuku spotted the kitsune, its face split open in a grin just like Shigaraki's. Well, they were getting along. Izuku chuckled as another, more blurry picture was sent of the pair. Seemed the kitsune had snagged the phone and now was running with it. Izuku pocketed the phone, satisfied he didn't need to worry. Izuku looked back to the eggs, disappointed seeing they still weren't done. Stubborn things just didn't want to cook. Izuku wondered if it was because the stove was electric. Maybe they just cooked differently from the gas stoves he was used to. Izuku perked up his ears as he heard bare feet on hardwood. Turning around, he spotted Kai. The man was yawning wide, only wearing a baggy pair of briefs. Izuku smiled, admiring Kai in the morning light. His tattoos stretched as Kai pulled at his sleepy muscles. "Good morning, do you prefer scrambled or?" Izuku trailed off, leaving Kai room to respond. "Scrambled sounds perfect. I actually have some cheese that works great in scrambled eggs. Give me a second." Kai stumbled into the kitchen, quickly raiding his own fridge. Izuku hummed, returning to the eggs. Kai moved to cut up the cheese on the counter beside Izuku. Izuku enjoyed the content wordlessness that settled between them. As Kai gathered the cheese into a pile on the knife he used, Izuku held the egg pan still. Kai gingerly reached over and dumped the new ingredient as Izuku watched. Instantly the rich smell of cheese cooking filled Izuku's nose. Kai was too good of a cook, such a small change, and the eggs went from ordinary to extraordinary smelling. Izuku heard Kai chuckle. Good thing you don't have any secrets to keep. Izuku blushed but agreed. Imagine if I was a spy. I would be a double agent without meaning it. Izuku laughed with Kai for a moment. Finally, the eggs seemed done. Kai pulled out a pair of plates that Izuku split even servings onto. Izuku left the pan in the sink to soak as he and Kai stood and ate in the kitchen. Thank you, it was nice to wake up to food today. Izuku shook his head with a mouthful of food. After swallowing he spoke. I was going to bring it to you. Kai smiled as he ate. What a steal you are. I feel selfish just eating with you. Izuku watched Kai eat for a moment, unsure how to respond. Thank you, but I'm the one lucky. Chisaki raised an eyebrow, almost daring Izuku to prove it. So he tried to do just that. I'm some weird kid, I can barely read faces, much less understand sarcasm. I'm just not good with people, yet here I am, feeling understood for once. I really am blessed. Izuku watched Kai's face sour. Izuku a Yakuza? So what? The normal people hate me. It's with the people considered scary or dangerous I've felt safest, alive even. Izuku laid his empty plate in the sink. Even if people say I should be scared, I'm not. I'm comfortable in a group, I'm talking one-on-one with people other than my mother for once. I wouldn't trade this for the world, Kai. Izuku smiled. When I'm with you, Tamura, and even Jiren, I feel at peace. Like I belong. Izuku watched Kai carefully, smiling as Kai smiled back. I'm glad, I've started looking forward to seeing you so much now. If you were to leave, I don't know if I could cope. Kai's voice was soft. Izuku took his empty plate and set it aside as he pulled Kai into his arms. Izuku squeezed Kai tight, sighing happily. Kai's arms wrapped around him, and Izuku felt relaxed enough to melt away. For the first time, his ever-noisy brain quieted, puttering out to relax. Word exited his lips without a thought behind them. I love you. Kai chuckled but nodded into Izuku's neck. I love you too, but... Izuku stiffened as Kai pulled back. You like Shigaraki, I can't hog you. Izuku felt his heart drop. Was Kai rejecting him? No. Izuku dug his nails into Kai's arms. Please at least for a while longer. Kai's face was unreadable before a pleading look overcame it. Do you really think you can love your herd all together? Izuku nodded instantly. He didn't have to think about it, it was just his nature. Honestly, if I don't form a herd, I worry about smothering someone. I have so much to give and give that dash. You have enough for more than one? Kai offered. Izuku nodded. Kai hummed. I'll try being part of your herd. Izuku smiled. That's all I could ever ask. Today was the day. Dabi was determined to get in Izuku's bed. That bull was going to be drooling all over him in no time. Dabi was spotless head to toe. His natural white hair was so clean it shined, his clothes were freshly washed, and he had scrubbed his skin raw. As far as Dabi was concerned, he wasn't on par with Shigaraki, Dabi was better. Dabi stared at his reflection for a moment. Was this what it took for him to take care of himself? Falling head over heels for some stranger? Dabi didn't know how to feel about that. He really needed to learn better self-care, didn't he? Was that what Izuku didn't like? That he didn't even care for himself? Suddenly his reflection wasn't some stunning figure anymore. He was looking at a loser with not an ounce of self-respect. No wonder why Izuku didn't want him. How could Izuku respect someone who didn't respect themselves? Dabi needed a drink. Laying over the bar, Dabi played with the rim of a glass. The barely audible humming calmed him. You all right? The scratchy voice was jarring, mostly because the person who owned it wasn't the kind to ask something like that. Dabi turned to stare at a very fluffy Shigaraki. His foxy ears were perked high in his direction. In Shigaraki's lap, The fox thing was watching him too. I'll be fine. Dabi returned to his glass. You don't sound fine. Shigaraki's voice was strangely soft. Your morning routine, what do you do for it? Dabi stared at his drink, not expecting Shigaraki to respond. Well, it used to be nothing, but now I change, brush my hair. But that's it, Shigaraki answered. Dabi paused. Shigaraki's routine was just as lacking as his. So that couldn't be what Izuku didn't like. If that was true, the bull wouldn't have hearts in his eyes whenever he saw Shigaraki. Izuku. Likes me? Shigaraki's whispered. Now Dabi would never get Izuku. Dabi growled at himself as he heard Shigaraki mumble to himself. Dabi. Shigaraki called. He looked up despite himself. You like Izuku, don't you? All Dabi managed was a nod. It was humiliating. Shigaraki was silent for a long moment. It was the fox thing that spoke up first. You two do realize that guy is a bull, right? He's got plenty to go around, I'm sure of it. Did a fox just give him relationship advice? Izuku and the man from the other day, Overhaul, were standing close together as Izuku smiled and laughed with Shigaraki. Dabi could tell they slept together, it was clear. Izuku had a hand around the guy's waist so casually it screamed, "Weaved." Moreover, the brunette was standing there like some wife leaning on Izuku's shoulder. Dabi perked up watching as Shigaraki's face started to turn red. He watched horrified as Izuku opened up his other arm, encouraging Shigaraki into his lap. Now Izuku had Shigaraki in his arms, giggling and grinning with his tail curled around Shigaraki's legs. Dabi watched as Izuku nosed at Shigaraki's face, an almost kiss. Dabi had lost the Deku race. No way Izuku would want 3 partners, right? No way in hell. Dabi watched jealously as Izuku pulled the 2 men into his lap, petting and cuddling them. Shigaraki and Overhaul seemed unfazed by each other's presence, happy to share Izuku's lap. Suddenly Izuku had a hand on each of their necks, pulling them down for a kiss each. Deku's hands were full, so was his lap. Dabi stared as Shigaraki curled in on himself, hiding his red face with his fluffy tail. Izuku giggled at the show, his wide smile making Dabi's heart sting. NSFW. Dabi wasn't sly. It was obvious what he was doing by Izuku's door. He could hear them. Izuku's groaning sent jolts down his spine. What he'd do for a glimpse of? Dabi froze as suddenly the bedroom door opened. A surprised Overhaul was staring at him. The guy looked like a mess, covered in sweat and other stuff. Overhaul blinked at him before eyeing him up and down. Oh, you here to tap in? It was Dabi's turn to stand stunned. Tap in? What was that supposed to mean? Overhaul tilted his head like a curious cat. Shigaraki said you might be joining us. Can you step to the side though? I need to grab some water. Dabi shuffled to the side baffled. Shigaraki said he might join? Dabi has torn away from the strangely wingman-like gesture as a particularly loud filled his ears. On Izuku's bed was a very artsy sight, so say the least. Standing at the bedside was a fully NDE Izuku. Dabi stared at the thick frame the bull had formed. His ears were pinned back and his eyes were tightly shut as he, oh lord. Dabi felt a shot of heat into his gut as he caught sight of Shigaraki's fate. The man was practically screaming for his life, nails digging into torn bedsheets. Izuku had him on his back, legs over his shoulders as he fed him roughly into the bed. White hair and fur were pointing in every which direction as Shigaraki's face seemed stuck, mouth open and eyes wide. Each harsh move from Izuku had Shigaraki's gasping for air. The wet slapping from between his legs got Dabi feeling all sorts of envy. Suddenly Shigaraki bit down and closed his eyes, legs trembling on Izuku's shoulders. With a squealing Dabi saw Shigaraki finish, covering his own stomach in white mess. Overhaul was back now, walking back into the room with multiple bottles of water. The man quickly slipped off the pair of loose breeds he had on. Slipping onto the bed now naked himself, Overhaul openly stared back at him as Izuku pulled out of Shigaraki. Overhaul moved to tend to the thoroughly destroyed Shigaraki as Izuku cooed over the men. Dabi didn't fail to notice Izuku hadn't finished. His pee-pee hung irked between his legs. The ever-polite Izuku seemed to be putting their needs before his. Suddenly green eyes were on him and Dabi felt exposed. He realized he had stepped inside the room. The door had been closed at some point. Had he closed it? Had Overhaul closed it when he came back? Dabi hadn't the slightest clue. Dabi's mouth was dry. I am. Izuku turned to him fully, showing himself in his full glory. Right? Isuku meant naked. You don't have to undress, but if you want your clothes clean it would be a good idea. Izuku said, smiling at him. He was acting like they were talking about the weather, not section. Alright. Dabi had never undressed so quickly in his life. Not really sure where to go from there, he moved to the bed, sitting on its edge. The sight of Shigaraki just to his right, struggling for breath, made him shudder. Shigaraki and Overhaul watched him eagerly. They must like watching just as much as acting. Dabi never had been watched before. Dabi shivered looking back to Izuku as he ran a hand up Dabi's leg. The bull gestured left with his head, making Dabi look. Laying across the bed were condoms and other things of the like. Dabi felt his face flush as he reached out for a bottle of lube. Deku hummed, accepting the bottle as Dabi offered it. Are you clean? City wise I mean. Dabi's voice caught in his throat. Izuku smiled warmly at him. If not, I'll just finger you, okay? Finally, Dabi found his voice. I'm clear. Izuku nodded, but his face grew a hint serious. It's okay if you do, I just don't want to expose anyone to anything. Deku thought he was dirty. Shigaraki chuckled next to him. He asked me the same thing, bacon bits. Oh, he was just being safe? Shigaraki nodded. I am clean, really, the farthest I've gotten is BLWBS so. Dabi explained. Deku nodded. Just checking, I want you guys to be as healthy as possible. Dabi didn't miss how he was included in that. The warm feeling in his heart was cut off as a lube-covered finger slipped inside of him. Relaxing his legs, Dabi laid all the way down on the bed. The position allowed Deku full access to limp legs and hips. Dabi ummed as Izuku started to thumb at his pages. He was only half-masked when he walked in, but now he was fully irked. Izuku chuckled as he closed his eyes, trying to enjoy the sensations he was being given. Shigaraki suddenly inched closer, asking something. Dabi opened an eye and paid more attention as Shigaraki asked again. It was hard to lessen as Izuku's fingers make room in his hole. Can I help? I have gloves and everything. Shigaraki's face was red. The man even showed his hands, proving the presence of gloves. Dabi nodded as Izuku added another finger, starting to pull at his walls more. The pleasant sensation of gloved hands exploring his body entered the event. He shivered as the rough texture passed over his chest. Soon Shigaraki zeroed in on sensitive buds, just as Izuku found one of his own to torture. Dabi found an arm around Shigaraki as the man curiously pinched and rolled at his chest. He would take moments to grope at Dabi's chest fully. Dabi couldn't help but chuckle as he spotted Shigaraki's ears. A little tug wouldn't hurt, right? Dabi flinched as Izuku jabbed him with 3 fingers, right on a bud inside his hole. Managing to get a hand on Shigaraki's ear, he pet the fluffy fox ear. As Dabi received a hot jolt of pleasure, he tugged Shigaraki's ear lightly. Instantly Shigaraki yipped, and Dabi ended up with teeth on his chest. He hissed as Shigaraki tongued at his BRST, his other hand playing with Dabi's other nip. Dabi sighed as Izuku's fingers retreated from in him. Finished already? He didn't think he came. Dabi froze, spotting Izuku's PP, irked and ready. Its tip was tapered, unlike a human. It was also inhumanly long. Sure, it didn't have much girth, but Dabi supposed that went into length. Shigaraki whimpered from his chest. No, that was Dabi's voice whining. Or was it them both? Izuku smiled a gentle smile as he tossed Dabi's legs over his shoulders. The image of him wrecking Shigaraki hit him. A second later, he felt Izuku's tip slide inside. The point slid easily, getting thicker as Izuku pushed more in. While it didn't look thick, it filled him comfortably. Not too big as to hurt. Dabi purred at the tip of Izuku's PP, kept catching on his walls, tugging roughly on his inside. No wonder Shigaraki had gone mad. The thing was like a spear that hit all the right spots. Soon Izuku was bottomed out in him, and to say he was deep would be an understatement. Izuku petted his thighs watching him and Shigaraki for a moment. "You ready?" Izuku asked, his ever-polite smile on his face. Dabi nodded, squeezing Shigaraki's ears. The man lapped at his chest like a dog as Izuku backed up. Suddenly Izuku moved back in, the entire slide Izuku's tip dragged roughly across his guts. As it passed his piggy, Dabi couldn't contain a groan. It might as well have been a direct hit with the way it made electricity shoot up Dabi's spine. Soon Dabi was holding onto Shigaraki for dear life, mouth full of the other man's tongue as Izuku railed him into the bed. His eyes were blurry with tears, but he could see Overhaul sitting on his knees on the bed, mouth captured in Izuku's. Everyone had a hand on someone else's pee-pee, uneven pumps stuttering from Izuku's pounding pace. Dabi bit on Shigaraki's lips as Izuku's pace started to grow uneven. Dabi had come all over himself at the mere idea that Izuku was about to come in him. Overhaul and Shigaraki may have been first to the party, but he was going to be the one first to the desert. Dabi clenched his fist around Shigaraki's pee-pee, trying to get the man off as Izuku started to growl. Dabi choked on Shigaraki's tongue as Izuku finally tipped over the edge, filling him with a burning hot mess. Dabi left Shigaraki's mouth with a pop, tossing his head back as the feeling of Izuku pressing into him, all the way, and filling him with his cum make his orgasm for a second time. Shigaraki followed after him, leaving a trail over Dabi's arm. Last was Overhaul, who purred into Izuku's mouth as he released. Dabi blinked awake, confused about when he had showered and gotten dressed. He was even more confused when he noticed he was in an odd cuddle pile with Shigaraki and Overhaul. They all looked freshly bathed and dressed, lazily stretching awake. Dabi tried to sit up, only to fail and flop back into the warm pile of limbs. Overhaul groaned at him but cuddled up to his back anyways. They had been utterly wrecked. Dabi peered over the spotless bedroom looking for a set of hair and horns. Where was Izuku? He wanted Izuku. Dabi, Shigaraki, and Overhaul all yelped as arms squeezed them from underneath. Oh, they were on top of him. Dabi managed to snake around to find Izuku's smiling face. He'd never seen the bull look so relaxed before. Izuku kissed him on the mouth, minty breath leaving Dabi liking his lips. As Dabi tried to cuddle into Izuku's neck, he was surprised when his nose hit thick rope. Pulling back, he saw a thick shimmering bell hanging from Izuku's neck. He could have sworn the carving of a bull and 3 cows on it looked an awful lot like them. There was a green bull, followed by a blank cow, right behind a white cow and a brown cow. The blank cow seemed to have patches under its eyes like him. Dabi reached to touch the bell to get a better look. He was startled a little when the cow that resembled him filled out in color. The blank turned into white with purplish spots. That was supposed to represent him, right? Dabi looked at the bell, happy that he was the one closest to the green bull. It's because I bred you first. Izuku chuckled. Dabi felt his face glow red. Izuku watched absent-mindedly as villains walked around him. They had managed to take over a good portion of Japan. The fighting was hard but worth it. All around Izuku could see men and women smiling and laughing together. Was it perfect? No, but was anything? It worked for them, and that was enough. The land they had taken was mostly farms and factories, but that was perfect. The rest of Japan was starting to dwindle without supplies. Foreign trade was still helping, however, and that was something they needed to fix. They didn't want to have the entire world gunning for them, so it was decided that the League would just take over shipyards and airfields. One thing was important though, they had to allow outgoing transport. It was simple: if ships were leaving Japan, people would be buying seats or sneaking on to escape. Izuku worried for less lucky folk, however. So, he left the street and moved inside. The office building was once a hero outpost, now it was Shigaraki's favorite place. The thick walls make it quiet, and it had a view nearly all around. Slipping into Shigaraki's room, Izuku spotted the man lounging on a chair. Shigi, I need you to think with me, Izuku started. Shigaraki perked up from whatever game he was playing, instantly listening. I'm worried about the people who wish to leave but can't. Izuku sat beside Shigaraki on the chair, pulling the smaller man into his lap. What should we do? If we try and search for them, they may mistake our mercy for hunting. Shigaraki hummed. Offer them some boats and planes? Izuku shook his head. I'm worried the heroes might try and use the vessels for themselves. That's a good point. Shigaraki leaned into Izuku's chest. It was a hard topic for sure. Suddenly Shigaraki perked up. We could let them think we are hunting them, and herd them right to a dock of boats. Izuku considered the idea and smiled. I knew you'd think of something. Izuku nosed Shigaraki's hair. Shigaraki chuckled, leaning into the affection. The day was set. Chisaki had found the day with the most favorable weather. Dabi led villains in mock patrols, instructing them to make noise and search. Mist machines were used to make it seem there was a gas attack. With every villain having some sort of mask, the effect worked wonderfully. A few stragglers stayed, but they were collected and driven to the boatyard with bags over their heads. Told that the bags made it safe to breathe and that the villains would let them off easy this time. Understandably, there was panic, but as word spread about the boatyard, people started running to the ships. Izuku knew logically they might miss some people, but it was already a vast improvement. People scuttled aboard ships, unaware the people manning them worked for the League. But they were safe, they would simply be driven off Japan. Heroes were helping funnily enough. Unknowingly though, they were searching and collecting people themselves, taking them to the shipyard. Soon, news traveled overseas, thank you internet, and foreign ships started docking to collect even more people. While the League had only set up one shipyard, new ones started to pop up with the heroes working with foreign aid. Of course, everyone was de-stressed leaving their homes. But it was the best. Izuku knew not every one of the villains in Japan had the same morals as him. It was for the best only villains remained in Japan. It took nearly a month until Izuku was satisfied with the departure numbers. With heroes still lurking around, a steady stream of people leaving Japan was still happening even when the League stepped back. Izuku felt proud, mostly of his partners. His herd had managed to avoid having to actually hurt anyone to get Japan cleared out. If that wasn't something to smile about, he wasn't sure what was. With the heroes picking up where they left off, Izuku took his herd somewhere nice to relax. The month had felt twice as long as it had been, and Izuku hadn't gotten to see his herd face to face in days. He found a hot spring resort, organized a team to operate it, and called his herd over. Izuku chuckled as he spotted his herd as they dragged their feet through the door. They had worked hard, they deserved some special treatment. Come on, let's all get bathed first. Izuku hugged the admittedly smelly trio. Even clean Chisaki was ragged. Izuku led them to the changing rooms, making sure to check them over for any wounds. Luckily his herd hadn't a spot on them. Izuku carried a basket of soaps and bath brushes as the trio left for the warm water. The springs weren't real springs, more of fancy hot tubs, but that meant it was okay to use them as a bath. Izuku allowed them all a moment to enjoy the water before slipping in himself. He took Chisaki into his lap first, knowing he was probably the most desperate to get clean. Chisaki hummed pleased as Izuku started to clean him with the soap. Most of all Chisaki seemed to enjoy the head rub. Once Chisaki was clean, Izuku went to Dabi. He had to be the most filthy of them. Izuku was careful with Dabi's skin, it was fragile after all. Izuku smiled as he saw Chisaki approach, taking a sponge and moving to help clean Dabi. Seeing that Dabi was taken care of, Izuku went to bathe Shigaraki. The man was just starting to fall asleep when Izuku picked him up. The man was rather clean already, so it didn't take long to get him spotless. Izuku sighed, satisfied he had tended to his herd. He started to work on his own dirty skin. The base of his ears and horns were the worst. Izuku covered his head in suds as he scrubbed at his hair. Suddenly he felt 3 bodies against him. Izuku closed his eyes as water poured over his face, making him able to see. Looking down he saw satisfied smiles. Izuku chuckled, leaning back against the wall. Seemed his herd wanted to return the favor. Shigaraki scratched at his ears, a new habit, as he watched Izuku carefully. The bull was lying in the open yard of their new home. It wouldn't be all that strange if it wasn't for the fact Izuku was talking to the air. First Shigaraki considered it was just someone he couldn't see. But the yard was open clover fields. Not a bush to hide behind. Deciding to go check on the bull, he patted his leg as he walked to the door. Instantly he froze, remembering the kitsune had left a while ago. It had taken its tail with it. It wasn't like they got in a fight, it was simply its time to leave. He remembered it thanking him for playing with it before it left. It had visited once or twice after that, but it no longer lingered around the home. No longer ran up as he patted his leg. Shigaraki didn't know what he expected really. Kitsune aren't dogs. They had their own lives to get back to. Tamura considered what was who Izuku was talking to. No, Izuku could have come and gotten him so he could say hi. Shaking his head, he left the home, closing the door behind him. Izuku was standing facing away from the home, talking toward a road. As Shigaraki approached, he tried to pick up on what he was saying. It was all a garbled mess he couldn't understand. It was speech, but not anything he knew. All for One had taught him to recognize different accents and languages though, so that was strange. Guess he better just ask Izuku himself. Shigaraki laid a hand over Izuku's shoulder, making the bull flinch. Izuku snapped his head around to look at Shigaraki. Hiya one Olive? Suddenly Izuku shook like he was shaking off dirt. No, nothing like that, not ever. That hadn't been Izuku's voice. Not the first part. But the language clicked, Arabic. He didn't speak the language but he could recognize it. Why would Izuku be speaking that? Shigaraki, is everything okay? Izuku looked at him worried. You tell me, Shigaraki asked back. He wasn't liking the odd behavior. He was worried something bad was happening. No, Izuku laughed oddly. Word just got around I've done a godly favor. They're asking questions. Izuku sighed deep. Shigaraki didn't remember Izuku ever looking so tired before. Are you going to be okay? Shigaraki wrapped an arm around Izuku's arm. It was really the only part of Izuku he could fit his arm around. Izuku shook his head, his cow ears flopping a little. I'll be fine, I just want a break. Shigaraki nodded worriedly. Izuku seemed tired, more than ever. Is there anything I can do to help? Izuku shook his head without hesitation. Nonsense, I'd rather not get involved myself. Some of them are kind. Others. Izuku sighed again. Most of it would only make more trouble. Shigaraki jabbed Izuku in the rib. I was talking about you, meathead. Izuku laughed a little. Shigaraki saw the bell around his neck shimmer a little. Right, sorry. Izuku leaned close, pressing his forehead onto Shigaraki's. So? Shigaraki prompted. Izuku only hummed. So I can't do anything to help? Shigaraki leaned away. It's not that I don't want help, it's just dash. Izuku seemed to struggle for the words he wanted. You don't know what you need? Shigaraki finished for him. Izuku nodded and sighed. Shigaraki hummed. That definitely made it more difficult. Dabi and Kai are off keeping people in line. Why don't we have some one-on-one time? Shigaraki offered. Izuku smiled as Shigaraki tugged on his arm a little. Okay, Tomo. Izuku followed as Shigaraki led him into their home. Shigaraki made a mental note to ask the kitsune how to keep gods away. Who knows when they'd visit next, but it was an important question. Izuku shuddered as he slipped into bed. He was freshly bathed and fed. Next, it was time for a nap. He was unbearably tired. As he started to feel everything slow down, Shigaraki cuddled up to him. He held the man close as he started to drift off. The smell of fresh grass and flowers hit him hard. Izuku shot up only to stumble on his legs. Grass was all around, he could hear people in the distance. Looking around, he realized he was in Hather's realm. Across the river, he saw people harvesting CRPs. They were more like figures of light than actual people. You grow tired, my little bull? Hather suddenly spoke. Izuku looked around, yet he couldn't see her. Fret not, I'm simply here to give you a choice. Hather's voice spoke from all around him. My bell, while giving strength, draws godly eyes onto you. Hather's voice was gentle and sweet. You have grown, but only to the cusp of your full potential. Yet I notice you have grown tired, I offer to take my bell back. Hather explained. With it returned, the gods will be blind to you. But we will not be speaking again. My strength returned, it would be time for me to return home. Izuku nodded. As sad as he would be to see her go, he was so tired. He felt it in his bones, his mind, and his soul. He just wanted to rest for a while. Izuku bowed his head. He didn't need to say a word. He felt the bell's rope tugging away. Once it left his neck, he looked up just in time to see Hather take form. She was in her woman form. She looked healthy now, and the bell settled on her shoulders more like a scarf. She smiled down at him. There was a sadness behind her eyes. Rest well, little bull. Izuku slept without gods bugging him for the first time in a while. Izuku cracked his eyes open. He swore he hadn't slept that well since childhood. Sitting up, he noticed he was surrounded by sleeping bodies. Dabi, Kai, and Tamura all shuffled in their sleep. They quickly settled back down as Izuku laid back on the bed. He'd stay in bed just a bit longer.